recording. We are about a minute away. I had people registering up until 2 minutes ago, so this is awesome. If you want, put in the chat where you're from and what position you have. We always like to see what people are, where they're from and what they're doing. We had about 60 people register for this, so that's exciting. From all over the country. Okay, Jim Thorpe area, is that in Wisconsin? Jim Thorpe area? I'm not familiar with that. Hi, Cheryl. Cheryl's one of my moderators.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited for today.
Me too. Oh, great. Another Wisconsin person. Yay. Hi, Dawn. Okay, folks, we're going to get started. It is 1 minute after. And we are so excited to be presenting to you Brent Conway. This event is being sponsored by the Literacy Task Force of Wisconsin. We are a group that has existed since 2004, and our mission is to provide evidence-based practice, information, and training to parents, teachers, and now administrators. So we're expanding our horizons, right, Nancy?
Yes, we are.
Is my president-elect, so she gets to take over in a year and a half. Yay. And so we're here, and we are so glad you are here. There is a movement in this country to inform administrators about the science of reading and practices and structures and systems. And so why not have someone who's gone through that process? So that's why Brent is here. I'm going to read a short introduction and then he'll take it away. So Brent Conway is an educational leader with nearly 25 years experience in the field. He's been a classroom teacher, worked in higher ed, and has been a special education leader, building administrator, and is currently the assistant superintendent for the Pentucket Regional School District in Westbury, Massachusetts. As a principal, he led Lincoln Elementary School in Melrose, Massachusetts, to achieve a National Blue Ribbon School designation for closing achievement gaps. As the assistant superintendent in Pentucket, he leads efforts in the district and across the state to implement evidence-based literacy instruction and provide advanced coursework opportunities for high school students. He's also a doctoral student in the Educational Leadership Program at the University of Southern Mississippi. And we are so glad to have you here, Brent. Thank you for agreeing to do this. And without further ado, Brent Conway.
Thank you. Yes, being in Massachusetts and being in a doctoral program in the University of Southern Mississippi, I am the one who talks funny in all of my classes, and yet it's not how I see it, but that's okay. Many of you are probably wondering, where is Pentucket, Massachusetts? Well, Pentucket is not an actual town. Pentucket is a region. So if you look at a map of Massachusetts, here's Boston, and Pentucket is right up here. This is the Merrimack River Valley, and it cuts through in the northern part up here. And we're right on the border of New Hampshire. There's 3 towns up here, and it empties into the Atlantic Ocean up there. Newburyport is next to us. So the 3 towns are West Newbury, Groveland, and Merrimack. And today I am broadcasting live from Merrimack. Typically we're in West Newbury, but as I was sharing with Donna and Nancy earlier, we are in the final stages of building our new $150 million middle high school, which will open up in August. So we had to leave for the summer for the next so many weeks because they were tearing the old building down that was built in the 1950s. So anyways, so that's where I am. And it's great to see people from all over the country here. I think this is an issue that impacts people regardless of where they are at, what part of the country, whether you're in an urban environment, suburban environment, it doesn't really matter. If you join today to learn how to teach kids to read, you're in the wrong place. I am not going to teach you how to teach kids to read. As an administrator, that is not my job, to teach kids how to read. As administrators, it is our job to ensure that those who do need to teach students to read have all the tools they need, have the support they need, the curriculum, the schedule, and the personnel to make it all happen. And I'll introduce that concept a little bit later to you with a visual and all of that. I have a slide deck. I'm going to show my screen. We're going to do that, and we'll go through. If at any point you have something you want to put in the chat, I think Nancy and Donna are monitoring that. I'm happy to pause. I'm happy to address questions. We can go back slides. I have no script. This is not a canned, this is not a canned presentation. I do this talking about like the systems side of things for districts at conferences. I do this a lot. This is a 3-hour one. We will take a break at about the 75 to 90-minute mark or so. We'll take a break for about 10 minutes for everyone to stretch their legs. I do like doing it in person, but we'll do our best and we'll march through. So the slide deck, I believe, Donna, I can share this slide deck with you. It can be sent to anyone in the group who's here. You can have it as far as I'm concerned. There are a few links in here that you won't necessarily have access to because some of it are some things with some student data that I have blocked out and I can't really share it with you like that, but you'll get the essence of it. And I'm available at any time too after this if you want to connect. So why don't we get going here and Donna asked me, are we going to do breakout groups or anything like that? And I said, no, we are not going to do any breakout groups. We are just going to, we're going to do this thing, right? That's how it's going to operate. So reevaluating your literacy program and following the research and what the science of reading really tells us, and then also charting a course for your schools and districts to implement it successfully. So this phrase of the science of reading, I don't use the phrase a lot. In the end, sometimes I do because I think it's what people are sort of looking to hear. The reason I don't use it a lot is this information has been around. It's not new. The phrase science of reading is new, but the information here is really not all that new. In fact, we were doing this in the early 2000s and in 2007, 2008, when I became an elementary principal. And some of the things, the research in here goes back well before that. So we do hear that a lot now about, all this new science of reading, pendulum swing. I think what I'm going to show you today is going to disprove that any of this is new or that it's a pendulum swing. And we can talk a little bit about how to navigate that in your districts too, because that happens. You get that. People try to wait you out, right? You're like, I'll play along, but I'll wait you out because it'll swing back the other way. And, it takes some sort of focused leadership and organized leadership, but also sort of a dogmatic approach where you really just sort of stick with particular things and always, always, always use data. So you will see me refer to data at various points throughout this. I am fortunate, as an elementary teacher initially, I did not know this. People ask, what grade did you teach? Well, I definitely did not teach first and second grade. I taught 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. I was scared to death coming out of undergraduate to go teach first grade and teach kids to read. That just frightened the daylights out of me. So, and how did I learn this? I learned this as a principal because we as a school needed to learn it. And I learned from some really good people, Joan Sedita, Sally Grimes, maybe some names and some other folks, Dr. Arndt, Janet Arndt, who's from this region as well, and some really fortunate opportunities for us to address it. And we learned it because we had to. And we'll talk a little bit about that school experience and through this. What really we're going to talk a lot about is how do you implement this in a school or district-wide approach? not necessarily how do you do this in a single first grade classroom. Because actually what I want to show you, and you'll see, is that doing it teacher by teacher, classroom by classroom, does not create the results that you're really looking for. You really want a system that will drive itself. And this is about systems change. And then I do have a website there, brentconway.com. If you want to see some of the things, it's shameless self-promotion more than anything else. So what does the science actually say about what works? And more importantly, what does it say about what doesn't work? And I think what's critical here as we move into this, for some of you who are on here, you may know this information. So we're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on here. We'll capture it, but there's a lot of research that gets layered into it as well. It's just as important as a leader, though, to know what doesn't work. If you ask me to go sit down and teach a first grader to read, I am not going to be as proficient at doing that as some of my first grade teachers. They do it every day. They are fluid with it, and they are fantastic and skilled with it. Me, on the other hand, I have a different way of thinking about everything. We think about schedules. We think about data systems. We have the system side of it, and we'll play that out. A lot of the things, when you talk about systems change, you're talking about people. You're talking about getting people to do things that they did not think were possible. And to do that, you need some things for them to sort of hang their hat on and believe in and link to. The phrase that I had learned a long time ago, in God we trust, everyone else must bring data. And that was a phrase that we use a lot in terms of how we really, data is the driver of a lot of what works and what doesn't, right? And then the phrase that I use a lot, and this really speaks to the system side, is we cannot intervene our way out of a tier 1 problem. And I think at the essence of everything that we'll talk about today, that phrase speaks volumes. This is not an issue for your special education department to fix. This is not an issue for your reading specialist to continue to pull kids out and do the interventions to get kids caught up. If you really want to create systemic change and movement, it needs to be done in tier 1. And tier 1 is the general education curriculum that all students receive. And it's curriculum that's based on what we know science and evidence says works. And it's what we ensure we build a schedule around, that we have enough time in the day so that all students, it's not to say they need more, and they may need more intensive work. They may need more time. They may need more precise work. They may need it in a smaller group. All of those sort of levers, that's all part of that tiered system. But at the end of the day, all students really do learn to read the same way. Some of them just do it effortlessly, while others need it more explicitly, more direct, and more systematically. So this really isn't new research. This goes back, the National Reading Panel in 1999 summarized research that had existed for decades. And they sort of put that out there, and many others too. So to become good readers, children must develop phonemic awareness, phonics skills, the ability to read words and text, which is decoding, the application, but in a fluent manner. So we need fluent readers. The ability to apply comprehension strategies consciously and deliberately as they read. This became known as the Big Five, and the Big Five still sort of hangs with us today as the major components that we need to address in any sort of programmatic approach to teaching reading. The problem with the Big Five is publishers have 1,001 ways they tell you that they address the Big Five, right? And I think what we'll see today is there are some programs that don't address all of them, or do it really poorly. What you really find is some of them do it and it's covered, but it's not sometimes in addressing one of them, they're actually undermining the other. And we'll show you some of that today too. So when you think about it programmatically, how can your data tell you if what you're doing is actually creating that undermining approach, right? And that's what one of the things we can address today. So more precisely though, what has this research sort of told us, in particular the National Reading Panel? So systematic and explicit instruction of phonemic awareness and systematic explicit instruction of phonics. Those are the first two bullet points for a reason. They are the foundational skills. So no more debate of whether students should or should not learn phonics. And the reality is, even in most balanced literacy districts, they agree, oh no, people need to learn phonics. Absolutely. That's how students learn to decode, and it's how they learn to read words that they are unfamiliar with. Now, how you do the phonemic awareness in phonics matters as well. But more precisely, guided oral reading, these are some specific things that came out of the National Reading Panel. Guided oral reading has been clearly documented by research to be, that is really important to developing reading fluency. So reading out loud is what students need to do. A lot of the sustained silent reading that we might have a practice of is not consistent with what we're talking about here. Vocabulary, what we know, is that it needs to be taught both directly, so apart from that larger text, and indirectly, so as words are encountered in that larger text. And reading comprehension of a text is best facilitated by teaching students the techniques and systematic strategies to assist in recall information, question generation, summarizing of information, etc. I think what we'll get into here is what many of us have seen in programs in our programmatic approach is when we go to teach reading comprehension and vocabulary, oftentimes we're doing it and we are undermining the phonics and phonemic awareness, especially in the early grades. And then even more so, we're teaching reading comprehension as if the reading comprehension itself is a skill. And what I'll show you in a little bit is that it is not a skill in of itself. Reading comprehension is a combination of multiple skills. And it doesn't necessarily translate from one text to the next because of all of the other aspects that go into what reading comprehension is. So this sort of speaks in contrast. So the National Reading Panel was unable to determine from research whether reading silently to oneself helped to improve reading fluency. And yet, they don't have research to support that practice. Yet how many schools ensure that there is time built into the day for students to read silently by themselves? Incidental phonics does not develop the necessary phonemic or phonological skills in most students. And incidental phonics is whatever the phonics pattern that comes up in a particular day, in a book, for instance, is what we teach to kids. That's not systematic. That's just whatever we encounter. And that approach is really inconsistent with what the science says. So we need a systematic approach. Decoding is how the brain learns to recognize words and then attach sound to print. And it's largely a phonemic task, not a visual task. That's important, or even related to memory for that matter. So it's really around the sounds. Vocabulary, list of words. So maybe the way, for instance, I might have learned words is that, if you remember in high school, your SAT prep, you had your 20 words, and they were all sort of away from context, not part of a book you were reading, just a bunch of fancy words. And that doing words that way, learning words that way, was really unlikely to help build someone's vocabulary away from the background knowledge and context. And that's really what we want. If we can learn vocabulary words in context of the text we're reading, that builds the background knowledge and the context we want for students. And the last one speaks to the comprehension skills, and that it really relies on your language comprehension first. What contributes to language comprehension? Vocabulary, syntax, grammar, etc. And then they all combine together with your ability to decode the words, which ends up as reading comprehension. So this is a busy screen. There's a lot here. And this sort of goes to the concept of whole language, balanced literacy, all of that. Balanced literacy sort of developed from the whole language folks who recognize, oh, we do need to teach decoding. And that was the balance, right? We balance this with this over here. And in most things in life, balance is wonderful, right? I'm not saying I do, but I should eat a balanced diet. I should balance my work and personal life. We should do all these things that are balances, right? When it comes to reading, though, like I said earlier, what we know is the brains all learn to read the same way, just some of it with different levels of intensity with needs. So most really don't disagree with those NRP findings. Most researchers don't disagree with it. The disagreement occurs with how best to teach all of these things and where are we the most effective and efficient. And as a school administrator or district administrator, that effective and efficient part is really important because that's about your systems. And we want to know how to do that for the vast majority of our students. There will be some outliers who may fall in there, and that's sort of another discussion which we can get to. But so it really is in this understanding and interpretation of how we implement these needs. So we talked about this, this idea of, this is about practice on a skill in order to master it, not just exposure. And a lot of kids need that level of practice. This attempt to balance things actually undermines effective instruction. I'll show you that. And we talked about that with you'll hear a lot of people say, well, there's no one way to teach kids. And it's true, there's not one single approach that works for all, but everyone's brain really does learn to read. We decode, then map the words for automatic reading. And that's really no different from one person to the other. Some just do it rather effortlessly. The language and creating meaning from language is thousands of years old. Think about that for a moment. Humans' ability to use language and communicate with language is thousands of years old. Reading is not. Reading is not natural to the brain. It needs to be explicitly contributors to language comprehension. The greatest contributors, background knowledge and vocabulary. And reading fluently is the greatest predictor of reading proficiency. I'll say that again, that one. Reading fluently is the greatest predictor of reading proficiency. And I should probably even have it should be oral reading fluency is your greatest predictor of reading proficiency. And then reading comprehension is actually an outcome, not an actual skill. And yet so many of our literacy programs that we buy and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on treat reading comprehension as a skill rather than an outcome. So I'm sure many of you have seen the simple view of reading. I'm going to use a couple visuals here if you haven't seen it before, but this is a multiplication problem. And this speaks about that reading comprehension as an outcome. And we talked about the things that contribute to this are decoding, the ability to read those words quickly, and then language comprehension, so the ability to understand the spoken words, right? And when those two are combined, you get your reading comprehension. And as a multiplication problem, if someone's decoding skills are really strong, so that's a big number, but they have very little vocabulary and language comprehension and struggle with syntax, a big number times a 0 equals 0. Flip-flop. A student has poor decoding. They struggle immensely to decode. And yet they have great vocabulary, great language comprehension. If they're given a piece of text, they won't be able to decode it and use their language comprehension. Therefore, their reading comprehension will suffer. The other visual that you may have seen is Scarborough's rope. And this is a color version. It's interesting because I've heard Hollis Scarborough actually does not like people using versions other than her precise black and white version. I do use this color version, but I always say that she would really much prefer people use it. I use it in presentations like this because I think it helps give a little more context to folks. And I want to spend a minute here, but I can go back and forth between the simple view and Scarborough's rope. Because on Scarborough's rope, you can turn this on its side and you have the word recognition on one side and you have the language comprehension on the other. So it's really the same thing as the simple view. And then the outcome is that reading comprehension. And that's really what you see there. And there's some things here I want you to pay attention to a little bit as you take a closer look, right? So we talked about word recognition. This is the decoding. You see all these different components that go into it. And you can see how this rope is sort of built. It's its foundational skill. And as it proceeds, students become increasingly automatic. And that key word down there is automatic. So we want a curriculum and instructional approach that builds automaticity with those skills. So and that's really important to remember, that for those skills, our goal should be building automaticity. When we go to the language side, there's a lot more up here. And some of this is done directly and explicitly, and some of it is done through sort of opportunities of exposure and all of that. So, and you can see as that rope proceeds, though, that becomes increasingly strategic. Strategy being different than automatic, right? So increasingly strategic means purposeful. And this is a purposeful use, okay? Purposeful use of all of these skills. So that's the brain applying like, oh, I know what that word means. I wonder what it means in this situation. That's not an approach that we take when we're decoding. We don't look at something and think, let me think about that, because that we want to be automatic. So you really do have to understand the two very different approaches. And when we do those together, we become skilled readers. And one other thing, and Holler Scarborough was very, very specific about this. The way these ropes are constructed is that the word recognition was a woven rope. And then if I were to hold one of those out, that rope kind of stops. I don't know if we have any sailors in the group, right? That rope stops. So if you're not developing your phonological awareness, your decoding, that skill is going to stop. The language comprehension is a wound rope. So the reality is you could have poor literacy knowledge of print concepts and genres, but the other skills will continue to get better. You can get better without it. The rope will be weaker for sure. But that's one of the ways it proceeds. And often when I show this, again, I'll go back and forth between simple view and Scarborough's rope. And this is all meant to be a very brief introduction into what does sort of the science of reading do. You will see, we will take Scarborough's rope as a district, and I'll show you later our assessment plan is all based on this. And this comes from Nancy Young, and this talks a little bit about that structured literacy approach. We talked about direct and explicit instruction. And the reality is, like I said, this 5 to 40% up here, they kind of learn despite what we do. I had a colleague once who said, well, we could put those kids in the closet, take them out at the end of the year, and they'll be proficient at the end of the year. I don't suggest actually doing that, but it does sort of speak to, we give them some books, we give them opportunities. These are the kids who, when we hear from folks who say things like, well, this always worked for some of my, we got kids who learn this way. We've been using this approach and we got plenty of kids who learn. That's who they're talking about. And they kind of learn no matter what we gave them an opportunity to learn with, as long as we're giving them some exposure to text. We certainly have our students who are in the bottom. Some say this number could even be 5%, but anywhere from 10 to 15% of kids have some form of deficit in that word reading component or language ability to develop language skills effectively. Whether we call them dyslexic or not, the point is it's there. They really require a very specific code-based and explicit approach. And without it, they're going to struggle. What you will find is this middle group is that a lot of these kids kind of work their way through first and second grade. Maybe there's some yellow and red flags here or there, but they've got some compensatory skills and they kind of hide a little bit. And if we're not providing this explicit, sequential, and systematic instruction, the rubber hits the road in about third or fourth grade. And all of a sudden, they're not really fluent readers. They tend to be poor spellers. Reading is not a lot of fun because it's kind of hard. And and they're the kids who begin to check out with reading in like third, fourth, and fifth grade. All right. We know a lot of these kids, and there are some red flags for them. They actually really benefit greatly from having that direct and explicit instruction. And it doesn't take a lot. It just takes enough to ensure that they proceed where they need to be. So, and give you some examples of some of this, how some of these things sort of interact a little bit. And as I do this, think about your own curriculum that you have in place and your own programmatic instruction. Do you see these kids I'm describing? Do they exist in your schools, right? Because if they do, this is a result of the system. It's not a result of your teachers. It's not a result of them as students. It's not even a result of your curriculum. It's a result of the entire system. So a student who has that great background knowledge, but when they encounter the word frantically, they can't decode it. Therefore, they can't access the meaning of the text, right? So maybe they look at it and go, they've got the F, right? Fun, and that's where it stops. So that's a decoding breakdown. And then we have a student who can apply those decoding skills. We know who these kids are, but they have very little vocabulary and background knowledge. So once they pronounce that word frantically, they've never heard it before. They don't know what it means. And they can't even hear the frantic part of it in case they knew what that meant. That's a language breakdown. And then we have students, a student hears a teacher or another student read the word, right? So maybe they hear the teacher read the word frantically, and they know what it means and is able to understand the text without reading it. That's actually an example of a student using language comprehension, but they don't have to read it. They just hear it. And then you have a student who struggles to decode, sounds out the first two letters like fur, and then guesses and says friendly. If they're reading silently, though, they'll continue to read friendly and the sentence won't make any sense. So that's the decoding breakdown that causes a reading comprehension issue. And then ideally, we have the students who decode the word frantically, hopefully with some automaticity, by sounding it out with the phonemes and graphemes. They're unsure of their meaning, but they use the rest of the sentence or sentences before it to figure out it means fast. So now they have decoded the word and they've used some context clues to realize, oh, that means fast. Now you have reading comprehension. So this is what we're talking about. We have a good understanding now of what the research says. So now what? And I don't know, do we have some questions in the chat there, Donna? This is maybe a good spot to stop, and or Nancy, we can address some of those.
No questions yet.
All right, good. We'll proceed. So now that we know, what does this mean? What does this look like? What does it tell us? So just as I said, what should you do? It's important to know what we should not be doing. What are these practices that we know are not effective? And some of these are listed right here. So what we're talking about is those three cueing. The idea that we would use a picture to try and figure out what a word meant. And I'm going to show you an example of that. And these, it's interesting. I remember doing some professional development just a few years ago. This is my 4th year in the role as assistant superintendent. I was an elementary principal in Melrose for a number of years, a middle school as well for 12 total years in Melrose. But I can remember coming here and we were talking about, and I referenced the 3Q phrase just a few years ago. And my first grade teachers go, "What's that?" They don't know. Teachers didn't know what it was. And I thought, oh, phew, they don't know what it is. This is great. And then I described it like, oh, no, we don't do that. And then literally half an hour later, they're doing it. And they don't realize that that's what it is that they're doing. This is all they've ever known. This is how they've been trained to give. This is how kids learn to read words, and they don't realize that it's MSV or 3Qing, right? So leveled groups. So we'll explain why a little bit. So what the leveled groups do is you prevent kids from getting into that deeper language comprehension component. And yet, why are they in a certain level? speaks to the leveled assessments. The leveled assessments don't give us any information as to why. The phrase is, we hear this all the time. If the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. So if your only screening tool is a leveled assessment, and here is my level H kids, you start treating them all as a comprehension issue at level H, when in reality, there could be dozens of reasons why these different students are at this level. And it's those reasons we need to know in order to be able to actually dive in and help them. The idea that when we have kids who struggle, or we even use the phrase, and I don't like the phrase, but my low kids, my lower level kids, that we just give them easier books. Again, we're sort of denying them the opportunity to engage with higher level complex text. And if we say, well, they can't read it, they can't access it, it's our job to teach them that, or also give them the language side so they can continue to increase their language while we address their decoding. When we group students by guided reading level, vocabulary and isolation, again, like, word of the day, or here's 20 words we're going to remember, a list of 20 spelling words, for instance, rather than working on spelling patterns, for instance, and really building the orthographic memory. Repeating comprehension strategy lessons over and over and over again. And we see this in curriculum all the time, is that we're going to do finding inferences, and you teach it again next week, and you teach it again next week. And every time you teach it, it's with a new text that has no relation to the previous text. Because the actual skill of finding an inference is very dependent upon the knowledge of the reader has, and less to do with their actual ability to apply the skill to a text. And I'll explain why in a minute too. So incidental phonics, we talked about that being sort of a real issue there too. And intervention programs that are broad and not specific to the point of breakdown. And I'll give you one. So LLI is one that just treats kids, we're just going to give kids more of level text. And naturally, like, just the more kids read and the more they have that type of engagement, they generally do get a little better. It's hard not to, but it's not actually addressing what their point of breakdown is. And that's really critical for kids who struggle. There's a great chart here. I will open it. This is from Louisa Moats. You can find this. And it is two comparisons of two major approaches. Louisa Moats uses the phrase SBRR, scientifically based reading research. And then she uses the phrase whole language derivatives. And I think that's important because at the end of the day, in balanced literacy, yes, we have phonics, but most of the comprehension, for instance, is taught like whole language. And there's a lot of research that talks about how we should be teaching comprehension as well. And it's not consistent with a lot of our workshop approaches, with a lot of our anthologies, for instance. They really are whole language derivatives at this point. And I actually have another one I'm going to show you that's very similar to this, and sort of like a do this, not that approach. It was interesting when we think about training teachers and having these conversations. For those of you who've ever worked with students who have some behavioral difficulties, we often think about the phrase replacement behaviors. It's one thing to tell someone don't do this, or to tell a child don't do this. We professionally know we have to give them like a replacement behavior. So in some respects, this type of approach with teachers can be very helpful in them understanding, well, if I'm not doing that, what am I doing, right? So these types of approaches can be helpful. So let's see, let's get back to, let's see if I can get back to the, go back to here, close that out. Here we go. All right. So, and that's generally, these are the things we talk about when we start really breaking that down. So this I think is a great visual too. This I share often. And this talks about that undermining. And I'm going to give you some examples in the next couple slides here. So we know what works up here: the phonological awareness, systematic explicit phonics, the vocabulary instruction related to text, and building that oral language. And if we do all of this stuff and we do it well, we're going to build good readers. But then if we try to balance that out by asking questions like, well, what would make sense? What word makes sense? Look at the picture, the first letter. So rote learning sight words. These are the types of things that even though we use Foundations in Pentucket, even though we just spent 30 minutes on Foundations lesson, and we're doing the really good stuff, we're really building kids to build that orthographic memory. And then we hand them a book and we say, well, look at the picture and guess what the word is. Or look at the first letter and you should be able to figure out what the rest of it. That's not what we're actually just taught, what we know works. So we begin to undermine that. And a lot of people don't realize that's what happens sometimes. I'm going to give you the example. So these books come from Reading A to Z, either Reading A to Z. So you see a level B book, and it's a little more pronounced, level A through D and E, it's a little more pronounced. So this is On the Farm. My guess is a few of you have probably seen this text. This is the front cover of it. It's considered a level B. So this is, kindergartners might be using this. So we might hand the students this book, and they might be reading it independently. They might be reading it in a guided reading group. And they get to this page, which is page 10. So now they've gone through this and they've had the same cycle. It's a very predictive text, right? And they get to this page and it says down here, animals are on a farm. And they look at this and they say, animals are in the barn. Now, what they read, animals are in the barn, does it really change the meaning of the text? No, not at all. For the most part, it's animals are on a farm, there's a barn. It's all relative, right? It's not going to change the meaning. It's not going to change what they understood the book was about. If you ask them to summarize it and give you details, it wouldn't change it. But what they didn't do is they didn't actually read the words. They just kind of guessed at the book based on their pattern and based on the picture. And this is what happens when we're teaching kids to decode and pay attention to farm, and we're able to sound out farm. That's what we want them to do. We don't want them to use the picture to guess what that word is. So that's an example of sort of how we end up undermining what we're doing for kids sometimes without realizing it. I'm not going to play these videos for you, but I'm going to open it up so you know what it looks like. My suggestion is you take a look at these videos on your own. It's 12 minutes and 14 minutes. They are what's called the Purple Challenge video, and I'll give you a little bit of the background of it so you know what they are. A woman who's a psychologist, she was home with her child in the spring of 2020. I think her child was a kindergarten student, maybe first grade, and was learning to read. And I think was sort of struck by some of the things that she was seeing. She was not a reading specialist by any means. So she sort of conducted her own mini experiment, granted with her own child, and she video recorded. So if I click on this first one, just so you see what it looks like. I'm a teacher just like you. I teach 6th grade science. And of course we get an ad, right? So here we go. So this is the text. This is the video. So I'm going to pause and it just says, is my kid learning to read? So she has some predictable text here that she has the kids using. She conducts an experiment and it's the Purple Challenge. There's 2 parts. I'll let you watch it. My guess is you can probably predict what's going to happen here, okay? So, but generally what happens is the child does some reading, seems like she's reading, but it's a predictable text. So it follows a pattern. And then she takes some of those cues away. She takes the pictures away. She takes all of those things away and asks her to read them. And all of a sudden she can't read words that she was reading before. For instance, the word purple, which is a pattern for decoding that would be a little more advanced. And then there's a follow-up video that shows what happens after she actually provides her with some direct and explicit instruction and how she's able to carry some of that over. This speaks a lot. Yeah.
These videos were done by, this woman's a researcher.
She's a researcher, correct.
She's a researcher. And I've spoken to her because I said, are you ready to reveal who you are? And she said, no, because she's working with her children's school district and she doesn't want anyone to know who she is.
Right.
But yeah, please watch these. They're extremely powerful.
And this speaks to the things that, like, Emily Hanford speaks to this a lot, right? That a lot of what we were doing, unknowing, like just people not well-intentioned, not really thinking about what we're doing. We had reading curriculum programs that teachers were implementing with fidelity that was teaching the bad habits of what poor readers do. Poor readers guess at words. Poor readers use a picture to figure out what a word is. Now, do I use pictures if there are pictures in a nonfiction text when I read? I do. I most certainly do. I don't use them to figure out what the words are. I use them to give me more knowledge and context so I can create better meaning after I've decoded what the words say. And so I think that the thing of 3Qing is sort of a misuse of an understanding of how we create meaning, because we do use images to create meaning. Of course we do. We use syntax. We use context clues to create meaning. Of course we do. But we shouldn't be using those to replace the decoding of words, because that is you're going word by word at that point, and it's not a transferable skill. So it's important to really teach those foundational skills. And then once students build that automaticity that we talked about, those other pieces that I just referenced can be applied more strategically with purpose. Okay, I get it. So what should we do? And I'm wondering, actually, maybe this is a point maybe to take a little bit of a break. We've been at this for about a good 45, 50 minutes or so. Do we want to take a little break? Is that fine? Donna, Nancy, what do you think?
If you want to, is this a good place to break?
Sure.
Okay, so what do we got? 5 minutes? 10 minutes?
All right, folks, we'll do about maybe 10 minutes or so to get going here. We should have some opportunity to have some dialogue and ask some questions at the end. So let's see. We have, so Central Time, you have, what time do you have there?
It's 12:47 here.
12:47.
You know,
so let's come back.
I was
You want to
thinking
come back?
maybe we should keep going for a little bit.
You want to keep going? All right, let's keep going. We'll keep going then. Good.
Because it's 3 hours, so let's break.
Got it.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
You got it. Okay.
Okay.
So this is so here you are now you're at a point where you are thinking in terms of, all right, we have some curriculums or we have some tools that we're using in our district that do some of these things we're talking about. I generally have no issue naming them, but for the purposes of today, I won't. So we think, okay, we're just going to buy a new curriculum and we'll implement that with fidelity, and that'll solve our problem. Everyone will just use one of the new curriculums that has the sticker on it that says Science of Reading approved type of thing, right? As if there is a thing. What I'm going to tell you is that that's not going to solve your problem, because the problem is more in a systems issue. Remember, I spoke earlier about that first grade teacher. She was using 3Qing, but had no idea it was called 3Qing. That's a training issue. And even by retraining, it's fascinating how much they still don't understand sometimes what they were doing before and how this is different. It takes a tremendous amount of unlearning and a real comparison of how this curriculum and tool is built differently and why, and then how to use it more skillfully. We have a teaching and learning blog that we use in Pentucket. We write about a lot of literacy stuff, but a lot about other curriculum as well. And the title of it is Very Skillful Implementation on Purpose. We don't use the phrase fidelity because skillful implementation speaks to the use of that data. And we want us to think about the data that we have that tells us sometimes we have to zig and sometimes we have to zag. And if I'm just doing it with fidelity, I'm picking up the book and I'm turning the page and I'm reading the next lesson. And that's using something with fidelity. And that does not take into consideration the students you have in front of you. It does not take into consideration their performance recently and their needs now. And it doesn't take into consideration the skills of the teacher themselves and their knowledge and their ability to understand who they have in front of them. So Meredith Lieben and Sue Pimentel, who are the two lead authors of the Common Core State Standards, they have this great tool that Achievement Partners put out, and it's hyperlinked here. It's called Placing Text at the Center. And you can certainly do Lieben, Placing Text at the Center. You could Google it. It is linked on the bottom of the slides as well. There's two pieces to it. They have a short guide, and I'm going to show you that because it's sort of, it was like that Louisa Moats tool that had the do this, not that approach. But they also have, it's an article, it's several pages long, but it's a fantastic tool to help explain the shifts that need to occur in the understanding of how we do this. And the great phrase, and I use this quote all the time, even teachers using excellent newly aligned programs are sometimes reverting to a strategies, skills first use of those materials. They are struggling to implement the lessons as designed because it requires them to unlearn what they have learned over the years. And boy, when I read this and thought back to our experiences here in Pentucket, where we implemented 4 years ago, Foundations, Hegarty 3 years ago, and then this year started to implement Wit and Wisdom away from a Reader's Workshop approach. So it was like a units of study Reader's Workshop approach. We had done 4 years of professional development, sort of working our way out of that Reader's Workshop approach. And I read this quote this year, probably in about November or so. We did all this professional development, and yet we still had some teachers thinking in terms of, well, I have to teach the main idea and inference. That's why it's, I'm stuck on this lesson. It's taking forever. And I realized, like, wow, that's it. This is where they're kind of like, they have to unlearn all of those approaches, that skills first approach. The reality is that doesn't transfer into new learning. And this really spoke to me and what needed to be done. So we call it the balanced literacy hangover. Actually, Jen Hogan, Jen is our literacy coordinator and coach here in the district. She and I are presenting at the Reading Leagues conference in Syracuse in the fall. And the title is The Balanced Literacy Hangover. And it was Meredith Lieben and Sue Pimentel's quote that sort of struck us with that and our own experience of this is like this lingering thing that the teachers are wrestling with. And it's why in Wit and Wisdom, a single day lesson is taking 3 and 4 days to do, because they're using it like it is a workshop lesson. They're using it like it was a balanced literacy lesson. And the things they're supposed to be focusing on in those language strands, right? They're not. They're applying just the comprehension skills when they should be focusing on the text and all the aspects to understand the complex language. And it's those same things like grammar and syntax and vocabulary that prevent kids from getting access to those. So what do? We give them the lower level texts that don't have it. Well, guess what? You can't teach kids complex text without complex text. You need the complex text. And that really is at the center of all of it. So we laugh about this a little bit, but it really is what we're experiencing, and less as we go on. But as districts begin to make the shift, and I imagine if you're all here today, you're at some point in this sort of road and transitioning to this, you will experience this and you'll be like, that's the hangover right there. But we had our spring data meetings. and the hangover looms large. We're sitting in our spring data meetings. I'm in the library of one of our elementary schools. We have spent 4 years talking about evidence-based instruction, moving away from workshop stuff, all of that. I'm sitting in there and I turn and I see the library cart, the cart with the books, right? And there's the sign on the library cart saying, find your just right book and count to 2 fingers and the words. And I'm like, oh gosh, more of it. It doesn't go away. I know earlier this year, I walked into a kindergarten classroom, and this was a teacher who went to intensive professional development on teaching decoding and orthographic mapping, connecting phoneme to grapheme, teaching decoding the right way. And there on the wall were those images of the animals, right? What's the Donna or Nancy? Do you remember? I'm trying. See, I get them. I wash them from my head now. The animals with the cues.
Yeah, Flippy Frog. Somebody
Skippy Frog. That's right.
Frog, okay.
Skippy Frog. Right. Skip the word you don't know and go. Yep, absolutely. Those
Chunky
little
monkey,
animals.
yeah.
Yes. So some of them aren't bad, right? Some of them aren't bad, but some of them promote the bad habits. And there it was on the wall. And I'm like, how do you have that on the wall? And it's just so embedded into everything that we have learned in curriculum and PD, and it's not right. It's the wrong way to do it.
How do you handle that as a upper administration? What do you do? What do you say when you see stuff like that?
So, some of it depends on your personality and your relationship with teachers. I think I'm in a position where I can have a conversation with many of the teachers, like, hey, the class I try to connect it back to, remember the thing we did last year where we talked about, attending to the print and working through the phonemes and the, no, that's been really good, really helpful. I go, can you look at the poster you have up there? And I can have that conversation with people. But there might be some people I can't have that conversation with, and I know I can't. So my conversation is then with the principal to say, I think you've got to talk with them about this. I'm certainly not going to walk in and rip it off the wall. I'm not going to do that.
Even though you want to.
Well, I'm like, oh gosh, how is this still happening?
Right.
But it's these practices just loom large. It really just sort of lingers, right? And I think so. We can talk to them, or I can talk to the coach, right, who can have this conversation with them as well. But fortunately, that teacher was like, "Oh my God, you're right. It's up there. I don't even use it anymore. I don't reference it, but it's still there." And I go, "Yep." So she went right into it, like, "I'll take it down right now." Okay, good.
Well, and I think you highlight a key point of the unlearning and what do we need to let go of, and how you mentioned so many times that it's a system issue, because I think, every classroom is its own ecology and its own system. And I think there's so many things that we do automatically because that's how we've been doing them,
Yep.
whether it's bookmarks or spelling lists or posters on the wall. And if we don't pause long enough to review those and see how they align with what we're trying to change or don't, they can just remain on autopilot. And so I think you highlight that it really is over time questioning many, many things within every classroom ecosystem to get over that hangover.
May I ask a follow-up question with that? So after you've addressed the teacher, do you also address the principal of that building who lets those things go? Because probably in their classrooms, when they were teaching, they did all of those and they feel like it's an indictment of their teaching to say that those things don't work. How would you handle them? Because that's my problem.
Yeah, definitely. Fortunately, I have principals who don't fight on this at all. That they understand, but some of them also weren't classroom teachers. So they don't necessarily have that background to fight against, right, or to push back against. But they don't necessarily have the knowledge to lean in on either. But yes, I would have conversation. It would almost be the same conversation, and it would be about the impact that those lingering effects have. And I would take out the do this, not that type of approach. But anytime you say do this, not that, anchor it in why, right? And we don't do that enough. We don't talk about the why enough. And that, Skippy Frog is what bad readers do. Those are bad habits, and we don't want to promote bad habits. Even in a cute, innocent way in a kindergarten classroom, we don't want to promote bad habits, right? But I do have that conversation. Unfortunately, I don't run into it much here, but I know in some places you have a building principal who is a balanced literacy person, a reader's workshop person, like that is their thing. And you have to begin to unwind that, right? And some of that is we do learning walkthroughs in our district. So let's do a learning walkthrough, and we have a team of folks, and it's 3 or 4 of us, and we're going from classroom to classroom. And sometimes it may not be focused on literacy. It could be a combination of things, but we will have a conversation afterwards about what are some of the things that are in place here that maybe are not consistent with what we want. What I'm going to show you a little later, though, is we also have a district literacy plan. That is a 5-year literacy plan that outlines where we're going. And it has goals, and they're data-driven goals. And those goals are sort of the anchor point for a lot of that conversation. If we want 85% of our students to be at or above grade level with decoding skills at the end of first grade, then we can't have Skippy Frog in a first grade classroom, right? So as we move with the the balanced literacy hangover, what we're really talking about is, and once you get to here, now we begin to talk about some things that aren't necessarily specific to literacy. So we really want to develop a system that follows the research. And this is true whether it is about behavior, whether it's about math, it doesn't matter what it is that we're doing. We have the research that tells us how students learn. Our system should be designed to get that outcome. And every system is perfectly designed to get the outcomes it achieves. I'll say that again. Every system is perfectly designed to get the outcomes it achieves. So if you continuously get the same outcomes, it is a system that is creating those outcomes. Go back and fix the system. And typically it's not one piece. The system has components embedded throughout. That's a Deming quote. Deming he was a big thinker in the, I think the late 1800s, early 1900s. And really what we're talking about is a tiered approach, right? So a tiered approach that uses predictive measures of reading proficiency and measures the skills that need to be explicitly taught, and then follows a curriculum and instructional practices known to be effective. That's what will result in high proficiency rates. So the predictive proficiency measures is really important. We're going to break this down a little bit. So this is my own take. Of course, everyone's got a take on something, right? So we talked earlier about the simple view of reading. This is a simple view of implementing a tiered system for teaching literacy. And so far, we've spent a lot of time in this middle section here, the instruction, the curriculum. So these are, what are the instructional routines for teachers to teach decoding, for fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, all of those? How do we differentiate instruction? Does it have the 5 components built in? Is it systematic and explicit, evidence-based with interventions? This work is done by the teachers. It's done by your special education teachers. It's done by your reading specialists. It's done by your paraeducators. That's the work they do in the classrooms. That's not our job. It's our job to ensure they have the tools they need to do it, but we're not doing that work every day. And if you are, I don't know how you have time to do anything else, because these are full-time jobs. The outcome we want is a system where all students are learning to read, right? Where we make it all happen, though, is the systems and structures approach, where we develop schedules. We have some personnel management. We embed these screening tools. So we talked about predictive measures. We'll show that in a minute. We have data collection and we have meetings. How many districts have screenings and the data goes into some system and we think the teachers use it to do something, but we don't actually hold a meeting where we break it down and really talk about and then have an action plan. Those are data meetings that you need to have. And there's all different types of data meetings. We have different types. Diagnostic protocols. So when students are struggling, how do we get deeper into their needs so that we can be more precise? Monitoring their progress. These are systems and structures that are primarily administrative functions to your school. Doesn't have these. Remember the multiplication problem we talked about. If you're a 0 over here, but you've got great curriculum and teachers, you're not going to have the results you want, because all of this ensures the skillful implementation of everything that's here. And you can have great systems and structures, but if you're using a curriculum that is teaching the bad habits or undermining the good habits, all of this work, you're going to spin your wheels, and you're not going to get to all students. And that's why when we look across the country, when we see phrases like NAEP scores are flat, reading scores haven't changed, it's 50%, that's what's happening, is that for the most part, districts have only one of these in place, sometimes none, or they have a little bit of each, and there's really not trying to incrementally increase both sides of it. But that's really what we want to do. And this is the visual that sort of helps us think in terms of this is our job as administrators, and this is teachers' job. So we used to call these bumper stickers, but despite my white hair, it is 2022. So I will use the phrase hashtags to live by, right? And this is, I talked a little bit about this before as you got to find some of these that resonate with people. And Jen Hogan, who's our literacy coordinator, she says, you have more phrases. And I know, because every phrase like connects with someone a little bit differently, right? And it resonates. And that's become sort of that dogmatic approach. And I know what, as a principal at an elementary school, the phrase that stuck with us at Lincoln Elementary that helped us sort of become a blue ribbon school for closing achievement gaps was, we want annual growth for all and catch-up growth for those who are behind. And that's actually the title of a book. And we had read that book. We did a whole staff read of that book. It was a story out of Kennewick, Washington. And I wouldn't even necessarily say they use the science of reading. They use elements of it, but certainly not based on what we would expect now. But they had a system and they had goals, and they were dogmatic about that system, about getting kids to be proficient readers. And that system silenced the curriculum tools we would say don't meet any of the expectation, but their system was so intact and everyone was on the same page about what they needed to do that they got results that were pretty darn impressive. Now, had they used the right tools, I think the results would have been even better, and it may have been more efficient. So I used that phrase early, back when we started, that efficiency phrase. That simple view of that tiered system, that's how to do it efficiency, with efficiency, excuse me. So assess to the point of breakdown. I'm going to show you our tool for that too, and instruct from there. If we're going to get kids to have catch-up growth, so again, we have students who start here, we want them to all finish here at the end of the year, but if another student starts down here and they grow a whole year, where are they at the end of the year? They're still just as far behind. It was a good year, but they didn't catch up. And our goal is to catch some kids up, have that gap closing measures. The only way you do that is by knowing where their point of breakdown is and giving them the instruction they need with the frequency they need it and the intensity they need it. That's the tiered system. But you can't do that in place of their tier 1, because then they don't make the annual growth they need. So you have to have this schedule, and I'll show you an example too. And we don't want to undermine the skills each student needs. We showed you that visual earlier. Intensify instruction early as the first signal appears. Do not wait and see. And tiers, when we talk about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, tiers are not associated or reflective of a location or a person. Think about that for a moment. Because a student is receiving tier 3 instruction, it doesn't mean that they have to go to a place. The tiers are reflective of intensity and frequency. That's what tiers are reflective of. A child who needs tier 3 intervention or instruction, it is highly intense. Tier 1 is less intense, and it's just the day. Whereas tier 3 it's the day plus then some and more. Structured literacy, this goes back to Nancy Young's, how she had the 4 different components, and we're talking about that 40% of kids who need it. So structured literacy is necessary for some or many, but benefits all. So the kids who are dyslexic or who have some sort of disability really need that structured literacy, but everyone benefits from it. Tiers are not those locations, right? Represents that level of intensity, frequency, and format. Skillful implementation of that high quality curriculum, and no intervention is as effective as high quality tier 1 instruction. So if you have the best interventionists and you start your planning with tier 3, and a lot of districts do this, well, let's figure out what to do for our students who are at the greatest disadvantage, who are the furthest behind, right? And you implement some really good high quality tier 3, but you allow tier 1 to continue to linger without the tools and instruction you need. You're just feeding your tier 2 and tier 3. You're just creating the monster that feeds itself. Start by addressing tier 1, and then tier 2 and tier 3 become more effective. And this is how I equate this, sort of another example. And I'll do it a couple different ways. Let's say, for instance, we have a 3rd grader who needs Orton-Gillingham style approach to instruction. They're clearly dyslexic, and they're getting that. They leave the room every day for 45 minutes and they get intensive Orton-Gillingham reading instruction, and it's working. They are gaining and they're making progress. They're closing that gap in their decoding skills so that they can be fluent readers. They go back into a classroom where they're using an approach that has kids guessing at the words, right? We're now undermining the very thing we just did successfully, right? And we're doing it for the kid who needs the most coordinated approach possible. They're the most vulnerable to that. And I don't think we always think of it, well, he's getting what he needs or she's getting what she needs. So when she comes back to the room, they have to adjust to what we do in general education. That's not an inclusive environment. And here's how I'll compare it. And often I think when I give this comparison, people are like, oh gosh, we'd never do that. But yet we do it all the time with literacy. Let's say, for instance, we have a middle school student who has an anxiety disorder. And it is very intensive. And every day they go to see the guidance counselor, the counselor, for 30 minutes. And they do a very specific work around their anxiety. And at the end of the 30 minutes every day, that student is at a great place. Their anxiety level is much, much, much lower, and they feel prepared to go in and handle class. And they go back to a classroom, they go back to their math classroom, and they come in a few minutes late, and the teacher, well-intentioned, says, oh, welcome back. You missed so much. We got to get you caught up. We got this to do. Sit right down. I'm going to show you how to do this. And it becomes really intensive. Oh boy. Everything we just did for that student in that intensive anxiety session with the counselor was right back to general ed, and we pulled the rug out from under them. We undermined it all, and that goes for naught. And we do the same thing with literacy instruction all the time, because our tier 1 is not supportive and inclusive enough for the students who need more intensive instruction at tier 2 and tier 3. It needs to be coordinated. And the last one, I use this all the time, all general education students, all students are general ed students first. I use the phrase general education instead of regular education. You may have heard that phrase before. I don't use the word regular ed because the opposite of regular is irregular. So we certainly don't think that anyone is irregular. So our general education students first. We try very, very hard to figure out how to make sure that all students have access to general ed first.
Okay, Brent, we have a request for a break.
You got it. Sounds appropriate.
Should we do 5
It's a good
minutes?
spot.
5 minutes and then come back, and then we could do another 5 later on if we want.
Possibly, yeah, we can do that. Sure.
Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay,
All
wonderful.
right. See you back in 5.
All right. Boy, that was fast, right? Okay, we are back and we are recording again.
All right. Yeah, quick 5 minutes, right? Well, thank you all. Yeah, we can, you get going and you get into something and
Yeah.
you forget. So I want to show you, before we sort of go back to the slide deck, one image I want to share with you. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. And this sort of comes from the UDL side of things, Universal Design for Learning. I don't know if you've ever seen this cartoon before. But it speaks to what we were just talking about, how general education, all students are general ed students first. And here we are, we've got a snowstorm. So for Dawn, you and I, we are very familiar with this image, right, of the snow. Others in the room may not be.
Right.
But here's a custodian shoveling the snow off the stairs, a group of kids out here. And this young student in the wheelchair says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" And of course, custodian says, "I will as soon as I'm done shoveling all the stairs so these kids can get in." And he said, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in."
I love
And
it.
it's about, ensuring that your tier 1 instruction is designed for all of your students. It's inclusive of all of your students to the best of its capabilities. Now, will they need something in addition to that? Sometimes, yes. This student, even with the wheelchair, even with the ramp, will need the wheelchair to get in, right? However, the ramp allows everyone to get in. And that's how we should be designing and ensuring that our tier 1 instruction is what we want it to be. And I think that's an important component. So I use that phrase, general education, that all students are general ed students first. And before we make any sort of real choice or decision to remove them from general education, sort of the way we think about it, and this is not an IDEA, this is not official language, right? So we have what we call, you have your tier 1 instruction. And then you can have supportive instruction, intervention at tier 2 and tier 3 that is in addition to instruction. So that everyone gets tier 1, and then these kids also get tier 2 or tier 3. Now, what tier 2 and tier 3 is going to depend upon what the data says it should be. We'll get to a point where we can just show you that too. But it should be in addition to, and that's how you get that annual growth for all and catch-up growth for those who are behind. In some situations, for the students who are that disabled, we might decide that they need in place of instruction or intervention. And that is a big decision, because now we are making the decision to no longer ensure they have all that grade level tier 1 instruction with supports and all of that, and that we're going to sort of modify the curriculum so much that it's now in place of that instruction. And that's a very different and big decision to make for kids, because when you make that decision, it has to be really purposeful, because it does change the trajectory for that student. So anyways, with that being said, let's go back to, let's see, where did we do that? Let me get back here for a moment. Close that out. And let's get back to sort of showing that slide deck. Where are we? Here we go. All right. So I think everyone can see that now, right? Is it back up? There we go.
It's small. Can you make it larger? Or maybe it's me. Is everyone seeing it small or is it just me? No? Okay. Never
It's full
mind. I
screen
think
on my end.
what?
It's full screen for
Okay,
myself.
so it's me. Thank you.
So we went through these hashtags. Again, these are just some things that I like to use, and because I think they capture specific things. The fact that I'm able to fit them all on one page is maybe the most impressive part. So we talked about this concept a little bit. Oops, sorry. Let me go back one. Here we go. Excuse me for a moment. Let's go back one. We skipped ahead. Here we go. So we talked a little bit about this assessment and data being really critical here, right? And this is really a good place to start. So if you are in your district and you're sort of you're a leader who is faced with a situation where you're trying to get people to understand why you need to change. Yes, we can take national data, we can take all that stuff. However, taking local data can be really, really important. So I want to talk to you a little bit about an exercise I did 4 years ago when I came to Pentucket. And honestly, at the time, I think I was a little surprised. I did not realize maybe at the time so many folks were still so engrossed in Reader's Workshop, Fountas and Pinnell, Lucy Calkins' units of study, all of these things. I guess it surprised me because it's not what had not been my experience in the district I was in. And then I began to realize like, oh, this is still very, very much a practice. And here we are in Massachusetts. Lesley University is a few miles from up the road here. And that is where Irene Fountas, made her name and continues to sort of fund the School of Education. So a lot of our educators in all the districts around here were trained at Lesley University. So for us, you come to Pentucket and a district where the students, this is not a lower socioeconomic community, these three towns. I wouldn't call it super wealthy either, but certainly at least a middle to upper middle class community. And yet 50% of our third graders were proficient on the state test in 2017, an embarrassingly low percentage. So when I saw that, myself and the superintendent started together. We said that just does not seem like that should be the case. And it wasn't always that way. It was higher. They had done literacy differently many years ago, about 10, 15 years before that, and had started to change into more of this workshop model. So, and at the time, they were only doing the F&P BAS, that was their screener. They would do demos at like kindergarten and first grade, but they never did anything with the data other than to do it. But the F&P data they would use, and they would group students, and they would tell, oh, well, your child's at a level H, or they're at a level P, and so forth, right? And that's how they would group students, and then they would give them the books. These are the books they would read in the guided. You know this experience, right? So I asked the question as we were meeting with third grade teachers about the BAS. I said, so what percentage of the kids at the end of the year meet or exceed the benchmark on the F&P? And said, oh, it's about 80% of the kids. I'm like, huh. Then why on the MCAS, and that's our state assessment, Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, why on the MCAS is it only 50%? Because you essentially give them right about the same time. I would think that if the F&P is the tool you're using to make all your decisions about how you're teaching kids, that it would be fairly correlated, at least on the aggregate, right? Well, the MCAS is a different, it is a different test, yep. But that's our measure of proficiency, and yet we're using an assessment tool that is clearly not predicting that outcome and under-identifying kids who are not proficient readers at the end of third grade. Vastly under-predicting. And here we are saying they're at or above grade level. And of course, I knew the F&P was not a predictive assessment. I knew it was flawed. How do we know it's flawed? Well, you're trying to assess comprehension. And if we went all the way back to Scarborough's rope, right? All those language comprehension plus the decoding, right? All of those things weigh in. It is really hard to screen for reading comprehension because all those different things play a role in a student's ability to comprehend text. So what I'm talking to you today, right now about is really about your assessment system, which is really a driver for change and decision making. So as we had this conversation, this is at the end of that first year with them, the third grade had agreed to do the Dibbles assessment. At the time, it was the Dibbles Next, so that it was just the oral reading fluency score. So I said, well, so it's off. 80 and 50 is off. I said, I'll tell you what, I did a correlation. So I actually took every third grader in their MCAS test, and I lined it up with their F&P. And then I asked them, the teachers, I said, so how well do you think it actually correlated by the kid? We know that, now they can hear, I said 50 and 80, we're off here, right? And, maybe 60% of the time. No, it's lower than that. 50%, no, it's lower than that. It accurately predicted, their F&P score accurately matched their MCAS score 20% of the time. Well, what does that mean? I said it's wrong on 4 out of 5 kids. So for every 5 kids, you have an F&P score that is inaccurate. And of course, that's like a personal, that they made a mistake. I said, it's not your fault. The test is flawed. You can't assess comprehension the way this test assumes you can. Because there are so many factors that contribute to that child's ability to comprehend and answer questions to it, including their own. So you're going to get inaccurate scores.
Brent, you are cutting out. Can you repeat? You've been cutting out on and off, but people are being able to read the slides. So back up like 10, 15 seconds about the F&P scores comparing. Yep.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's only accurate 20% of the time, at least on ours, right? And when so, well, what does that mean? It's wrong on 4 out of 5 kids. And it's not your fault, it's the tests. You can't assess comprehension the way the test assumes you can, because that's not what contributes to comprehension. You have kids who have different background knowledge, different vocabulary, kids who can decode and can't. You have all of these different things that contribute to how you understand text. And yet you're basing everything you're doing for reading instruction on a test that's wrong on 4 out of 5 kids. Mm-hmm. But the third grade teachers, I said, you use the oral reading fluency. I said, that predicted 80% of the time. It matched 80% of the time. And that is very consistent with national studies that oral reading fluency is the greatest predictor of reading comprehension. And sure enough, in our own little mini experiment, not scientific by any means, that data played out. I have seen some other F&P analysis that it's like 50% accurate. In our case, it was 20% accurate. So we have to use measures that are predictive, and we want to assess to the point of breakdown. So we use a tiered system of assessment, and we put this into place 3 years ago. And we want to use it for a couple reasons. Number one, we want to group students for targeted instruction. We want to adjust for whole class instruction. So when we have large percentage of kids who aren't proficient at something, we want to adjust it for whole class instruction. We want to know which students need more intensive intervention and on what specific area, right? What precisely do they need it with? And we want to know which students are making progress and attaining that catch-up growth. So we have our tiered assessment outline. And this is a tool that took a little while, but you can see we base it up here, the simple view of reading. And then all of these different assessment tools or assessment areas get outlined, and they cover over the grade level. So this, we begin to break down, and these colors correspond with, let's see, you can see the different colors here. These colors correspond with the bars that are up here. So you know what it's actually assessing, what area it's assessing. And this is part of our plan. And the first column are all of our screeners. So the screeners we would use 3 times a year, every kid gets it. And then we have over here in the far right, I'll skip the middle for a moment. Over on the far right, we have our diagnostic tools. These are generally the ones that we use for special education evaluations, right? Classroom teachers are typically not doing these. Maybe a reading specialist might to help sort of determine something, but for the most part, these are special education teachers, school psychologists, speech language pathologists are doing these assessments over here. In the middle, we have either our progress monitoring tools, so in case we want to do a sort of a double run of something to check if there was an anomaly for a student, or a drill down. So for instance, with decoding, we use a quick phonics screener. So the DIBBLS gives us nonsense word fluency, but it doesn't really tell us where that breakdown might be. So we have these different tools that we do. And we break this all the way out over here, and it helps people to understand the different components that they can get information from. Now, when we use these screening tools, we have data meetings 3 times a year. So after all the data is done, I'm going to show you how we collect it as well. We have a data meeting at the end of September. We have one at the end of January, and we have one in late May or June as the school year winds down. And each of those are a little bit different. Now, in between those, we have those 6 to 8 week progress meetings. I don't attend those. Those are typically like a reading specialist and maybe the classroom teachers at a grade level attend. But those 3 big annual ones, we look at all the students, we look at the aggregate data, we set goals for the whole grade level team, and we identify the students who have specific areas of need, and we identify how we're going to go and address those. Those are big meetings, especially that January one. Mid-years is heavy. We're going to switch to a model where we bring in substitutes and we can give them 90 minutes a grade level to do it. It takes me about a week and a half to do it with the reading specialists and the literacy coach, but it's incredibly, incredibly valuable. I'm probably at a point where I can step away from some of it a little bit, but there's some things there that would be troublesome sometimes to not be part of. So I enjoy being part of those things. So so that's really what happens there, and that's how we use those meetings that we see right there. So, and then what do we do with that? So this is from AIM Institute. And these are sort of our guides to help people think. As I tell people, this is not an IDEA special education flowchart, eligibility, or anything like that. It's more or less broad. So we're looking at, let's say we're looking at their fluency skills. And if their fluency skills are weak, we want to look at their word recognition skills. In other words, what is their automaticity on the fluency versus accuracy? And if their automaticity is weak, we want to look at their decoding skills. So we look at their nonsense word fluency. And if that's weak, we look at their phonemic awareness skills. So it's this sort of whole flow chart to decide where is the point of breakdown. And then even more precisely, we can look at things like if letter naming fluency, we analyze it. We analyze it for accuracy, because remember we talked about these foundational skills. Accuracy was really important, but automaticity was very important. So it sort of tells us what that flow chart would look like. And then the phonemic segmentation fluency. So this is a specific test. The letter sound fluency, so correct letter sounds. Again, automaticity versus accuracy, telling us what we need to focus on. Nonsense word fluency, oral reading fluency, and really getting into, is it an accuracy problem? Is it an expression problem? Or is it an automaticity problem? and really breaking that down. And we do this 3 times a year. And then for the students who are getting the intensive intervention, they're seeing a reading specialist, we're going to monitor their progress. I'll show you how we do that too. And we're going to meet 6 to 8 weeks later to see if we need to make adjustments and see if we're being successful. And then 6 to 8 weeks after that, we're at our mid-year data point, right? And then we do another 6 to 8 week cycle, and we get into late March, early April, and then it brings us again to the end of the year. So,
Okay, Brent.
I don't attend those middle ones.
All right, we got some questions here.
Sure.
So people want to know if they can access this PRSD literacy assessment outline. If
Yep,
you'll-
sure can.
Is-
You sure can. And my suggestion would be, and you can find this AIM quick guide for reading assessment. And honestly, there are some others out there too. It's not the only one. So Susan Smart and Deb Glaze. So Susan Smart is producing another text that she's going to send out. That's good. I think it's going to get published in the next 6 months. And it also has sort of a flow chart like that. My suggestion would be this tiered assessment tool. This took a little while to put together for us. Probably about 4 months of sort of collecting the information, putting this together. This is easy to recreate. It's just a chart. And then it's putting in the information that you have. And honestly, this is a PDF version. I bet you the one we actually use now is a little different than this one, because we're always sort of updating and tweaking.
Okay,
Based on things.
can you, and you'll include that, or can we get hold of that?
Yeah, so this is linked here. Yep, so it is linked on this slide where we talk about assessment. It is
Yes.
linked right here. And
Okay,
it's an open access link. Most of the stuff we do is open access. There's a few things we keep a little tight, but most of the stuff we have is open access.
okay, great. Here's a question. How do educators and administrators get the training needed to analyze this data? On the job training and experience doesn't seem efficient.
Yeah. Generally, I think you have to, so it's sort of train the trainer model, right? So you have to have some people who are specialists. There's some great research out there, and I'm actually gonna, let's see if I can pull it up actually. Here it is. So this is Joe Torgeson's work. Joe Torgeson was at the Florida Center for Reading Research, but this also comes out of Center on Instruction. And this guide is unbelievable, just fantastic. And look at the date here, folks, 2007. And
We
there's
can't,
not much in here.
I can't see
There's
it.
not much here I would say is dated. Oh, can you not see it?
I can't.
Oh,
Your
let
slide
me-
is what's on the screen.
yeah. Let me fix that. Hold on. Let's see, where are we? Let's just do what's on the screen. There we are. How's that? Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So it starts here. This is teaching all students to read in elementary school, a guide for principals. And again, this is 2007, and Joe is out of the Florida Center for Reading Research, Florida State. He's retired now, but his work lives on. There is not much in this guide that I would call dated. Some things around the comprehension and knowledge building stuff and maybe connecting writing is not quite as current as we know. But as far as systems go, this is a Bible. This is a fantastic tool. But how do you get the training? I mean, I think your reading, to a degree, does an assistant superintendent need to know how to analyze the nonsense word fluency or oral reading? No, I'm not sure they do, but you do need people in-house who do. And we just sort of, our data meetings that we have end up being like professional development for the teachers, because we're going to shift the ownership to them. So by mid-year, we want them to do something.
All right, we lost you. We
But as
lost
soon
you
as
for
I'm
about,
not here, they're not prepared to do it anymore.
you gotta back it up. 10 seconds. We lost you.
Oh, goodness. I don't know why. So I think it comes down to the groupings. We want them to take ownership of the data. I can put kids into groupings, right? I can do that. And I can say, this kid needs this kid needs this, put them in this group, go get them. But then they don't own it. And the moment I'm not there to help explain why it happened, why these kids need these things, they're not sure how to address it. So we want them to have ownership of that. That's coaching. So getting training. AIM Institute does a great leadership. Keys to Literacy is another great component. And there are some other things, there are some others out there that are doing that work, to help train administrators, for instance, and train reading coaches and reading specialists. There is a great research study out there that talks about schools that made school-wide change had two types of leaders in the building. They had an administrator who could sort of make the pieces work, the schedule, the people, getting the right professional about all that stuff. And then they had the sort of that coach and the person who was able to be in the classroom, really analyzing instructional approaches. And when you're able to get those two types of folks, you don't have to be in the building full time. We have a district-wide literacy coach and coordinator. She is in 3 different buildings. And she's able to do it. So I saw a hand. Aileen.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. So in regards to training, I guess I'm just, I'm a special educator. I've been trained in a lot of the tier 3 assessments, that kind of thing. That's a little bit where I live. But in terms of boots on the ground, thinking of, a new teacher or a teacher who's moving from, the infamous moving from 5th grade to 1st grade or, something like that. When I say that it seems just kind of wildly ineffective to get the experience, trial by fire kind of experience, is there a course, like a 3-hour deep dive dip like this, where teachers, really can get that, helpful hints for a better living of what does nonsense. If you see a kid who's struggling with nonsense word fluency, what does that mean in terms of your instruction? Like what is there something, are there courses out there that connect these dots? Not one more book to read per se, but is there a,
Right.
either a series of 1 hours or a 3 hour or something? Are there things already out there in package that we can recommend to districts?
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that are free. Carol Tolman's Hourglass components, those are excellent to help you understand how the skills attach to the instruction and the data, for instance, but then what to do about it. So how to differentiate, for instance, how to use the different tools. And those are some of the things I talked about. Susan Smart has one. I think it's
her book is called what's it called? And it's being updated, like you said, and it's coming out
Yep.
in the spring.
Mind blank. Next steps. Yep.
In literacy instruction, and it'll have a breakdown of she and Deb Glazer are writing that.
Yes. Yep.
It will have all these intervention techniques and things what to do, and maybe processes of how to identify kids.
Yep. That's a good tool. And even the older one they have is just as effective. It'll be a little updated. University of Oregon has some tools for reading. It's not necessarily a video. But, as far as classes go, Keys to Literacy is very good with the classes on that. AIM Institute has some, and there are others too.
Yeah.
So, let's see, who else? Heather, you had your hand up too.
Thanks. I just was curious about your 6 to 8 week progress meetings. It sounded like definitely a coach and the reading specialist. Are there regular ed teachers there too?
Oh yeah, so the general ed teachers are definitely there, and it's just less formal, right? It's not quite. We don't have an agenda. We don't have this like convening that we, and it's just checking in on the kids who are getting, because when we say reading intervention, classroom teachers are doing reading intervention too. So it's not just the reading specialists. And it's actually important. We want them to sort of hear just a check on the progress of how they're doing. Most often it's sort of stay the course, right? That's typically the outcome, but sometimes it's not. Right?
Okay,
Perfect.
we had another question. Oh, where did it go? I'm sorry, I can't find it. Oh, never mind. I can't find it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think the important thing is building the expertise of like your reading specialists and people like that who can act as that person to help people understand what to do with the data. Having your own in-house people to do that. Because honestly, once you get there, it's all pretty, it becomes a little bit, it's more consistent. So.
Here's the question. How do you assess Lexile?
Oh, yeah. So we use iReady. And we use that in grades 3 and up. We don't use it in K1 and 2. And we just get a Lexile score. I mean, do we put a lot of stock in it? No, I think it sort of gives us a broad measure of, how a student might be comprehending and applying their skills. But all this data, and I'll talk a little bit about how we triangulate it. I'm going to show you one of the sheets we use. It's all taken into consideration as far as, going down sort of the checklist of where kids are at with their skills. And we look at what is that point of breakdown. Students might have a high Lexile, but their fluency is poor. So then we look at their Maze score, for instance, and, is it their syntax that's in that? What's contributing to the breakdown so that we know we can try and address it? And we'll talk, how do you address fluency, for instance? Well, there's some good ways to do it, and there's some ways that aren't as effective, and ideally our focus has been largely on what we do in tier 1, at the same time building up some tier 2 and tier 3 approaches as well. But most of our focus is on tier 1. And I can show you some data as we proceed.
Why don't you use iReady in K2?
We use the Dibbles, and I think what it would tell us in K1 and 2 would be either repetitive or we trust the Dibbles 8, and it's been pretty accurate for us. And we don't want to assess the kids to death. We get enough information. It's a screener. That's what it boils down to, is that we want enough information as a screener to know, do we have enough predictive tools here to know what's going on? And at the end of the day, the iReady is going to be better at telling us comprehension. And it's really hard to accurately assess comprehension in K1 and 2 because of all those other skills that could be contributing to it. So we rely on the teachers and sort of assessing their language comprehension.
I've also heard that the iReady gives false positives or false negatives, and
They all do.
Yeah, and I don't think it's
Yeah.
sensitive enough or specific enough for the
Yeah,
kid.
it's computer based. So I mean, it's and honestly, we have found it's very predictive. Once we get into like 4th grade and up, we have pretty good pinpoint predictability based on where kids' outcomes will be, so long as we can sort of triangulate the other factors.
Mhm.
Is it Rhiannon?
Hi, thank you for sharing all of this information. I am wondering, how do you assess, how do you target, how do you differentiate for multi-language learners?
So I think, there's, we have ELL staff. We do not have a very high population of ELL students here in Pentucket, but I did when I was in Melrose. We had, we were 50% high needs school there. So I think you have to take into consideration, where they are in their progression in language skills. And certainly our ELL students can still learn to decode and apply those decoding skills. And I think what we take into consideration are the impact it has on their language comprehension. Sometimes it's quicker than others. So we have our other ELL assessments that help us understand where their strengths and weaknesses are in how they're understanding it. We're not going to push an EL student into a fluency intervention if that's not really the point of breakdown, even though their fluency score might be low. right? So we try to ensure to be sensitive to that. And honestly, it's just a lot of good discussion around the student and their profile, and trying to ensure they're getting the instruction they need. It takes time to do all this well. And that's the thing we have to remember in the systems, is building enough time and really just being consistent with it. So, all right, I'm going to proceed with some of our some of the slides. So, and we'll keep going here. So treating reading comprehension as an outcome, and then teaching those skills and the knowledge that leads to it. I think that's an important point. So I share this that, you know, from a system standpoint, we need to focus on those really foundational skills that have students relying on understanding the code to develop into fluent and automatic word readers. That's the phonemic awareness in phonics. Progress monitoring closely for those who show early signs of struggle, particularly with those phonological skills, and then intensifying instruction. That's all part of the system. And using that system and curriculum that provides that direct and explicit instruction, and that we get to that orthographic mapping so that we can really focus on the spelling and writing, for instance. So this talks a little bit about teaching, increasing this automaticity, right? So we talk about this a lot. So we want to practice the skills that need automaticity, but build the skills and knowledge that need strategic use. So there's a distinction there of how we go about doing it. And this gets at breaking away from maybe a way we used to teach reading comprehension, okay? So before, we used to practice find the main idea, right? It's like find the main idea. And it was these random passages that had no relation to anything, and the students had to write the main idea. And they got really good at basically rewriting the first sentence on the page, and they got enough, right? They know how to game the system. And the reality is, now give them a text that they're unfamiliar with, and they're not going to be able to find the main idea, especially a complex text when the main idea is usually not in the first sentence. Now, increasing automaticity, so decodable readers. So this is like this really controversial topic, right? And I hear this phrase all the time. Oh, I'm going to get rid of all of my level text and replace them with decodable readers. And I go, time out. Level text are books. Books are books. There's nothing wrong with the books. It's how we use them. The ones that may not be level A, B, and C might be sort of predictable. They have those patterns, right? Those aren't so good. But all the others are just books. They just have a level applied to them. Don't throw them out. Decodable text have a very different purpose. We should be using those to practice the taught phonics skill. And we should use them very purposefully. But once students sort of get past a certain point with automaticity in reading, there is no need for them to be using decodable text. They should be using regular books. For students who still continue to struggle and need practice, a decodable book is a very helpful tool. It is just practice of the automaticity. If you spend 30 minutes in a phonics lesson teaching a particular pattern, what a great idea to go have them practice that pattern in a book. It's a controlled text for that phonics pattern. I hear people, what are the best decodable readers? And I would say the ones that follow your phonics scope and sequence. Those are the best ones, right? Because that's how you use them, okay? We want to tier the use or moderate the frequency and intensity based on the ease of learning and the student demonstrates. And this is where we have these different levers that we can pull. There are many, but we have some. And the levers we can pull sort of change. Either we can be more frequent, we can be less frequent, we can be more intense, we can be less intense. And it's based on how they're doing, okay? How do we do more frequent? We get them to see the person more often, right? Maybe they see the general ed teacher, they see another teacher, and they get another block later. The intensity is we really narrow the scope, and it's like 2 kids, 1 kid, 3 kids, and they're getting intensive work, okay? We want to include fluency building, reading the activities that build that automaticity. This is really important here. So repeated readings do build fluency. But more importantly, The way we assess it should be different than the way we teach fluency. You are better off doing untimed grade level text once a student is beyond the early decoding skills. So once you're past some basic decoding skills, the way students build fluency is repeated readings of grade level text, not lower level text, and not a decodable reader, and doing it untimed. We may assess it at the end timed, but as as they're practicing it, it's untimed. We use Wit and Wisdom. They have fluency passages built in that are part of the core text. So it's an excerpt from the core text they're using. So it actually has connection and more purpose, as opposed to a fluency intervention kit, which has random passages that have no meaning and contextual meaning to kids whatsoever. And they're just doing these repeated reading exercises. So, and then partner reading and other oral reading are a great way for them to increase their automaticity, rather than assigning kids to go read silently. Do partner reading so they're reading out loud more. And it is okay for them to read books. That's okay. It's actually a pretty good practice. And that sort of changes us a little bit here to the other side of this. So comprehension strategies are actually a thing that can be learned, I see a typo there, sorry, through context, exposure, and knowledge. The strategic application of language comprehension. Remember we said that we had that automatic application of those phonological skills. Now we want to have the strategic application of language comprehension. And as those two come together, then we get really strong readers. And this speaks to some of the other things. And if you have not had the opportunity to read the book, The Knowledge Gap, if you have a school or district that is used to teaching these and getting people to think about comprehension differently, away from the bounds, the knowledge gap is a great way to do it. Okay, so it's an easy read. It's not an intense read, but full of great information. So a lot of these guided reading approaches, we teach these strategies, main idea, sequencing, inferencing. It's not that those are bad things. Like, we do want kids to be able to do them. However, what we really know is that instruction on these in a repeated manner on unconnected text really don't have the effect that we think it does. Practicing them like that doesn't impact the automaticity the way it does decoding. What we really want to do is we want to be able to build up background knowledge and vocabulary so that even the most skilled reader who understands how to make inferences, they would struggle to make inferences with a text that they know nothing about. And the comparison, there's two links here. You'll get an opportunity to see them. The baseball study versus a cricket recap. If you've ever heard about the baseball study, it's highlighted in the knowledge gap. So the baseball study talks about a group of sixth graders, seventh graders who were not strong readers. And then they had a group of students, sixth and seventh grade, who were strong readers. But they, at the time, of course, baseball now, kids don't follow baseball the way they used to, right? But this is going back, I think, almost 20, 25, 30 years ago, actually. And the kids who were not strong readers were given a passage that was considered fairly on grade level about baseball, as were the students who were really strong readers. And there was no discernible difference in their comprehension of the text, because the kids who were struggling readers had background knowledge and interest in general in baseball. And they're able to apply their background knowledge, assuming they can decode, they're able to apply their background knowledge to comprehend the text. Whereas those who had no more or less background knowledge didn't understand the text any more or less than the weaker readers. Now, I'm a baseball guy. I grew up playing baseball and I coached college baseball, but I don't know anything about cricket. And there's a link there to a cricket recap that comes from overseas. I think it's New Zealand. And if I were to read that cricket recap, so I'm going to open it up for you, okay? And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. And for anyone who knows cricket, my apologies. The first international cricket to be played in New Zealand for almost 9 months also took place on Friday, as the Black Caps beat the West Indies by 5 wickets in a rain-affected first 2020. With the match in Auckland reduced to 16 overs per side, West Indies posted 180-7 after captain Kieran Pollard hit 75 not out off 37 balls, including 8 sixes, while the New Zealand fast bowler Lockie Ferguson claimed 521. The host target was revised to 176 off 16 overs, and with regular captain Kane Williamson sitting out this series, the Kiwi top order slipped to 63-4. I'm going to stop. I will spare you the rest. I could decode every word, but I have zero background knowledge about cricket. My ability to visualize what's going on is highly limited to literally someone with the helmet on and the cricket stick, and I can't really picture what's going on. A fast bowler, I can apply fast. I assume I know what that kind of means, including 8 sixes, no idea. I don't know what's going on. If you ask me to tell the main idea, what would I do? I would tell you that the first international cricket was played in New Zealand. I would go back to the first end. That would be my best guess. I'm probably not, that's not really the main idea though. The main idea is more about who won this game and how they won it. My point is, like, I'd like to consider myself at least a proficient reader. I can't comprehend this because I don't have background knowledge and the vocabulary doesn't have context to me. And there's even syntax there's using in here that's a little confusing. I have to go back and reread some sentences because the syntax is a little different, partially because it's written overseas, right? It's English, but they're going to use some different syntax. Here's an example. If you gave me a reading comprehension test and this was the test, I'm going to the intervention group, okay? Because I'm not going to be able to tell you anything here. So I think these are the types of things that we need to remember about reading comprehension in general. And if you said, well, Brent, we're going to practice inference again because you clearly couldn't make any inferences. And we're going to practice inferencing every day until you show us you know how to make inferences. Well, if this is the text we're going to continue to do, and then the next day it's not cricket, it's something else. And then it's something else the day after that. And it's something else the day after that. Some days, all of a sudden, I'm going to look like I can make inferences because I might know something about what we're reading about. And then other days, I'm not going to be able to make any. Let's be honest. 3-year-olds who can't read a word make inferences all the time, right? If I were to come home and I had a 3-year-old at home and I came home and I had a McDonald's bag, that 3-year-old might make an inference that they're about to go they're going to have some McDonald's French fries or something like that. And yet little do they know, I had found the bag and I put some trash in it and I'm just going to throw it in the garbage. But they see the bag and they make an inference, oh, we're going to have McDonald's. That's an inference. No reading involved, right? That's a cognitive process. When you apply it to print, though, you're using your background knowledge and experience and vocabulary to the situation. So this is something we need to think about. So if we're using random passages, it's not going to help us much. So let's see. Let's go back to, here we are. All right. So, and that's sort of that summarizes a different way to think about comprehension and the flaws that existed within the ways that we had been teaching it. And again, treating this reading comprehension as an outcome and teach the skills and knowledge that lead to it. So using oral language and read alouds, especially in the younger grades, but even as you move ahead, right, with grade level text with all students to teach and pre-teach vocabulary and other aspects of text. Language and vocabulary is how we're doing that. Include lots of nonfiction or content that requires students to have in-depth dialogue. So talk, language comprehension, dialogue, and uses the text for the discussions, vocabulary and language. If the teacher has to do all the talking to explain what the book is about, you're doing it wrong. Have the kids do the talking, right? Let them use their language. You'll have to do some, but let them and build that in. We, in Wit and Wisdom, for instance, we have students, Socratic seminar. We have second graders doing a Socratic seminar. And it is awesome to watch about such complex and challenging topics such as civil rights. And it is fascinating to watch these kids take charge of their own conversation and ensure that all students have an opportunity to contribute. It really is, it's just outstanding language comprehension. And it builds and builds and builds. And then sure enough, after they're reading multiple different texts about civil rights and Ruby Bridges and all of these different things, and they're having all this language dialogue, and we're teaching some of the vocabulary words that they need to learn. All of those things, we ask them to write about it, and they're pulling from multiple different texts and perspectives, and it's fascinating to see it all come together. So, and including the morphology of some of these words in particular, this is you really, once you're sort of done with the early phonics and you move into like second and third and fourth grade, connecting to the morphology so that kids can make those connections to more vocabulary words. You build their sphere of understanding of words. So, you know, I think, and then having students write about the text and the content, for instance. And if you can connect content across areas, that's even more powerful. But writing about them and using different text is really what we want students to be able to do. So I am going to sit on this page for a bit. I think this is important. This is the short guide for placing text at the center. These are maybe 5 summary points here, but I'm going to open it up because I think people should see this. We have about, we can go for maybe about 35 minutes or so, 40 minutes, and then we can make sure we have some questions at the end. So the short guide for placing text at the center, this talks about using grade level core text for whole class instruction that is connected with paired selections and other textual resources that build knowledge. Your ELA curriculum is not a social studies or science curriculum. And social studies and science curriculum is not a literacy curriculum. However, in social studies and science, you are still teaching literacy skills. And in your literacy class, you should be building content knowledge, because the more students read about conceptually related content, the more they can put together and understand and comprehend text. And that the conceptually related materials allow those students to connect thoughts, vocabulary, and ideas through varied presentations. Have students write using multiple text. One cannot write about something they know nothing about. And if you've ever done a master's program or a doctoral program and you had to do a thesis and you had to do a review of literature, your review of literature literally made you well read on the topic. You supposedly became an expert on that particular topic because you read a volume of conceptually related text. You did it at another level beyond what we're going to do for 3rd and 4th and 5th graders, but that's what you did. And as you read more, writing the last part of that was very easy because you had all of this knowledge and you're pulling it from all these different sources. Independent reading is best done with books that have conceptually related topics to in-class reading. So those connections. Now, if a kid really loves reading fantasy books and that's not what you're doing, by all means, don't stand in the way of that. Reading is reading. We want kids to read. But if you're trying to set up opportunities for kids to pick independent reading books, try to organize them so that they're related to either what you're doing in literacy. So for us, civil rights unit in 2nd grade, and all kinds of books right around it. But it can be about social studies and science too. Just the more they're reading about what you're doing in school, the more connections they make. When things are in isolation, they don't make those connections. You want to teach tier 2 vocabulary words that really allow students to access the text. I think this is a mistake we do in a lot of textbooks. So if we get maybe a social studies text or anything, and there's maybe 2 words in a section, it's bold, and they give the definitions on the side, right? Those are the words we usually teach because we think they're really important. I would argue those are the words we shouldn't teach. Why? Because the book is teaching it for us. We need to teach the words that the students are their tier 2 words. They cut across multiple content areas, and they really prevent students access to that. Let me just share, let's see, I can, one visual here. Is this it? Yeah, that's it right there. I can share that again with you so you can see this. There you go. So this is when, as you begin to think about vocabulary, those tier 1 words, these are everyday words, very familiar with students, primarily through conversation. I'm going to open that other link to the short guide. I'll show you in a minute. This is very helpful, but tier 2 words are those robust academic vocabulary words that students are likely to encounter across numerous spots. And then tier 3 are words that belong more specific, science. You might see photosynthesis or something like that. I mean, sure, you might need to explain what it is, but I wouldn't spend too much time talking about it. They'll learn it through science. But I think this is just a good visual for that. So let me go back to sharing that other screen we had. All right. Oh, I did it again. Sorry. There we go. All right. So that vocabulary, I think, is helpful. Let me open up this short guide for you. I think this is very important to see here. Is it coming up? Give me a second. Here, we'll show it right here. This is it right here. And this I find to be a great resource. This is the short guide that accompanies an article that you should read, because it really talks about, again, do this, stop this. So we talked about fluency. Do tackle fluency daily. So you should have a system that addresses that daily. It gives you a rationale, and it tells you to stop, what to stop doing, right? Don't do it based on levels. F&P has fluency scores, right? The problem is it's a fluency on the lower level text for kids. So you really don't know if they're fluent readers or not at grade level. The independent reading talks about that volume of text and conceptually related topics. It's such an important concept to understand about it. Talks a little bit about the whole class instruction with those grade level complex texts. We want kids to read complex text. They can't learn to read complex text by reading simple text. You have to use complex text. And this, and Tim Shanahan has some really fantastic stuff, Dr. Shanahan, about how to teach kids and how to prepare to break down syntax and grammar and sentence structure to allow kids to actually handle, dive into complex text. He talks about doing, connecting your writing, for instance, all very important stuff. Let's see if I can scroll this down a bit. I just think there's just so many wonderful, wonderful tips in here, and it compares it against what you would do. And this is what we talked about, like teacher, replacement behaviors, for instance, right? So a great tool for you to utilize. So let's go back to where we are. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things we have done to help with some of this. All right. So what did we do as a district? Well, we added Heggerty phonemic awareness to be used right before foundations. And this is where maybe some of the science gets a little fuzzy. We all know phonemic awareness is important. It is best used with letters and to connect the phoneme, which is the sound, to the grapheme, the letter or combination of letters that make that sound. Here is really just the phoneme awareness. They have a 2022 version coming out, which is actually more aligned with what we talked about. If I hear people say, oh, our phonics program is Heggerty, I get a little worried because it's not. It is a phonemic awareness component that is meant to be used with a phonics program. It is not meant to be used all on its own. When we first implemented it, shame on me, I assumed all of the teachers knew you used it in conjunction with foundations. We went to the mid-year data meeting. 2 of the buildings had their phonemic awareness scores into the 90s, and one of them was still in the upper 60s or low 70s. They go, what is going on? Sure enough, they're like, oh, we use it in the 10 minutes before we go out to recess. And I'm like, well, there it is. They're not making any connection to it, and it's not carrying over into their ability to decode. We made that switch, and they were like, oh, we didn't realize that. And we explained why, and it's like, there it goes. up go the scores. I'll show you the scores in a few minutes. We use some of these sorting charts in our literacy data meetings. I actually have one a little more blown up here, but let's see if I can open this one up. It's just going to play nice here. Here we go. So this is probably really hard for you to see, but we use this in first grade to really break apart the different stages of nonsense word fluency. So when we go into these data meetings, we have the teachers basically writing the names of the students of where they fall in one of these boxes based on, are they sound only decoding? Is it not accurate and accurate? So if you remember that flow chart we talked about, right, making decisions, this sort of leads right into this. This is more detailed in first grade. Our second and third grade one isn't as detailed. Sound by sound, partial blend, whole word reading, and then we get into instructional implications. Some of these things came out of reading first. This is not new stuff, actually. And then example activities. So we connect it to a lot of the things that we have here. So this tool is very helpful to us. Let me show you another one. Here is our second and third grade one. So you can see a lot less complex. We have one for 4, 5, 6. And this is using our DIBELS and our iReady or Maze score. And we categorize kids. We ask the teacher as we go through, we sort, I'll show you the sorting chart in a moment. And we put kids into these boxes based on where their skills are at. So for students whose fluency is going fairly well, but they seem to have some comprehension issues, we put them here and so forth. And then this allows us to, when we do grouping, small group instruction, these are the groupings we're talking about. We might even get more precise based on these groupings, because then we can start to talk about essentially those groupings. What strategies and what approaches are we going to use to address the different needs of the kids here? So these are some of the tools that we use. This is a lot of DIBELS oriented stuff. There's a kindergarten one. This looks a little different. We'll show you this one because it's really focusing on nonsense word fluency and phonemic segmentation. So this is the level of granular activity we get into to really determine, assess to the point of breakdown, and instruct from there. So in doing all of this, we set up a staggered schedule. And I'm going to show you an example where we have these 45-minute blocks of time for small group instruction, and we try to flood a grade level with support personnel. And this is the administrative side of it. So my example would be if I have 3 first grade classrooms, we might have about 120 minutes of core literacy time. And in that last 45 minutes, that's when we're going to do our small group targeted instruction. So that's 3 classrooms. What I'm going to do in that last 45 minutes is that's where I'm making sure the special education teacher is going into one of the rooms. It's where I know I have a paraeducator and I have a reading specialist. So now, and maybe I even have a 4th person sometimes, right? So now I can put 6 or 7 adults into 3 first grade classrooms for 45 minutes where kids are going to be grouped based on what they need. So not only did they get general ed instruction for everyone, now they're getting more targeted instruction. And the kids who were furthest behind, the kids who are in that bottom right-hand quadrant, right, the kids who had the red and the red, they're going to go from one adult to the next adult. And one adult's going to work on that one thing, and the next adult's going to work on something else. They are going to get the most direct adult instruction, by far the most. The kids are in that top quadrant up there who are green and blue, and they're doing wonderful. They may only see one adult 2 or 3 times all week during that time period. They're doing partner reading. They're doing some reading responses. They might be doing some vocabulary work. They might do word work. But they're doing more independent and partner activities that are meaningful, purposeful, or they're reading conceptually related text, building their knowledge. And I'll show you that and how we do that. You know, we try to do it in grade spans a little bit, but it has been very effective. And I had used it historically as well as a principal prior, and it is a model that's very effective. Again, if you have kids who are the furthest behind, they need the most targeted instruction. We started using decodable readers that match the phonics sequence. So that was a big step for us to do that effectively. But again, it's not, you don't use it like a guided reading book. So you're not trying to find the main idea in a decodable reader. That's not its purpose, right? No, its purpose is to practice the patterns. Now, can you check for comprehension because you want kids to practice it? Yes, you can. We trained our teachers in K-3 in effective methods to teach foundational skills. We did this in a number of ways. We were part of an early grades literacy grant here in Massachusetts. So I had a bunch of folks who got tons of professional development. We've done numerous book studies on a lot of different books. People are engaged in that. We have, we did keys to literacy training. So we brought them in and they did training for our folks as well. And our grades 4, 5, and 6 people got trained too in some things too. So it's all, we weren't going to train them in decoding strategies and approaches. That wasn't it. We focus on vocabulary instruction and oral language work from a class-wide grade level text. That's that wit and wisdom work and that oral language vocabulary, but also the fluency building, grade level fluency passages. We have a win time. So outside of that 120 minutes, there's another 30-minute block of time. So when kids need the additional reading support, so in addition to, we have a block of time for that. And those two are staggered so that they're not all happening at the same time in the entire building. So that the grade 2 win block is different from grade 3 and it's different from grade 4 because it's the same specialists who are going to be needed to do that. And we also trained, I think, 18 elementary and middle school special education staff in either OG, Wilson, or LIPS for the precise programmatic service so that we can make better use. Before, we had like one person in every building and they were the Wilson teacher, or this was the Orton Gillingham teacher. And they were the only ones who could provide that specialized service. And it became really restricting in our schedule and we needed to loosen that up. So we spent some grant money, some of the federal money that we had received recently on that. So here is a schedule. This is a sample schedule. You will get, and I see Sharon Dunn is with us today as well. Sharon and I had done a webinar about a year and a half ago about scheduling, right? This in of itself is 3 hours, like scheduling. So it's days actually. So, and Sharon is an expert at California and we do, it's amazing how many things we do almost exactly the same. We're never ever trained together and we just got to know each other through all of our work online here. But here is a visual schedule of what I was talking about, how you can see, and the sample schedule is actually hyperlinked here. So you have an opportunity to get the sample schedule. And you can just make a copy of it and you can work with it. But you can see down on the bottom here, there's a tab. This is the full academic schedule. So we dictate in the elementary school for every grade level exactly when they're teaching what. It always amazed me when you walk into a building and the teachers are picking, well, I'm going to teach this here. It's rarely done based on what was in the best interests of the kids or the other staff members. It's just what was convenient for them. And I don't mean that as an insult to them, because if you gave me the opportunity to schedule something on my convenience, I would, right? I would do the same thing. But as a school administrator, you're not looking out for one class, you're looking out for the whole school. And you have to schedule this so you can stagger those people and you can make the best use of those resources. So in this schedule, you can see how there really is sort of this staggering of things. And like the K1 special ed teacher is sort of the same person, the 2-3 special ed teachers. So you can see their literacy blocks are staggered, and it's that way on purpose. And then there's another overlay to this, and I won't click on it in here, that shows how the support staff, so the reading specialists and the special ed teachers, get layered in on there. Doing this for the first time and taking the control away from teachers is maybe one of the most maddening exercises you might do as an instructional leader in a building, because it is like telling them what they're going to have for dinner every night of the year, right? And you take personal choice away from them. But once you do it and get it done, most people can't fathom how they used to do it without it. Because at the end of the day, if it's survival of the fittest when it comes to scheduling, and who knew, right? When you became a principal, who knew that when band and art and PE is taught dictates how everything else and when it is taught. Who knew, right? And it's true, especially if you share specialists with other buildings, right? But what we basically do is we say, how much time do we need to teach literacy? Let's block that out. And then we block math out and everything else goes around it. Now you'll notice the purples over here, the specials, those are actually done first. So we do the specials first because they get shared, right? So we have to do that. And then we schedule literacy. You know who gets scheduled first for literacy? First grade. That's our priority. Right? And then we sort of build out from there, right? And if you're saying we need 120 minutes for literacy, I'm scheduling 120 minutes for literacy, and we will schedule everything else around that. There is no perfect one single schedule. And again, you probably might have 1,000 questions on schedules, and we could sit all day and go through them. When you get this, you will see at the top here, there is a sample schedule link. This brings you to the actual Google Sheets file here. Make a copy of it and play with it all you want, right? But it is sort of a template for you to work with. And Sharon Dunn's a pro as well. If she's someone, she's on that Facebook group too. So if you ever need to reach out with her, she's excellent with this stuff too. So, but again, the scheduling, it drives so much of what you want to be able to do. You have tremendous control. And I say that in a positive way, not to control everything, but you have tremendous control about how things go through the schedule. This is this is our literacy data tracker. And this is the part I don't have a link on here. I blocked out students and so forth. You can see this is actually from December this year. This is a screenshot you see here. But we do this in Google Sheets. All of these are conditionally formatted. Some of you pay lots and lots of money and you get your, M-class, thing or whatever it is. We like this because we can add in all kinds of stuff. So I'm actually going to, open the document. Let's see, here it is. And then I can play with it a little bit and I'll show you what we do here. There we go. All right, so you can all see that now, right? That's up there. Okay. So so this is you can see we got all the grade levels here. We use their student ID, so we upload them from our database, and all the teachers are here, so they're all assigned. So I can filter by teacher, I can see by teacher group, all of that. This is first grade. This was the fall. So remember those grids that we put kids in different boxes. So we would, in a data meeting, we would start and we would sort kids right here by correct letter sound. Go, okay, now let's look at their oral reading fluency, and we sort that. All of these are conditionally formatted. So for instance, if this student actually got 56, it changes the color, and it changes the color there. So I'm going to undo it so I don't screw that up. And I can sort of reverse order as well here as well. So you can see these are students who are doing quite well, right? And we do it by the different assessments. And then at the same time, what we do is this is our progress monitoring. So same thing, conditionally formatted, the different assessments, and then it brings us to the winter, and we can enter the numbers in there, and it does the same thing, right? Now, as I go to other grade levels, so if I go to third, let's go to fourth. Yeah, let's go to third grade because we've got plenty of assessments here, right? We can make some notes here about what we're working on, what they need to work on. This is where we make the notes about what the focus point is. But here's students, let's sort them by oral reading fluency. So you can see here are students whose fluency is very poor, but we're making the decision that it's actually decoding issue and not fluency. Because we'll look at their fluency and then we look at their accuracy. So we know they're not accurate, so let's look at their decoding, and here's the issue. Assess to the point of breakdown. This is what we like about DIBELS 8, is that it gives us these decoding measures into second and third grade, for instance. But you can see I moved down here and I have students who have some poor fluency. Their accuracy is not great, but it's getting there. But for the most part, except for this student right here, it actually is really probably a fluency issue. So the classroom teacher knows what to do. And when they see those kids in a small group, they're going to work on fluency, for instance, right? So it's that level of targeted work that we do in the data meetings. And then they are expected to keep track of the progress monitoring. So you can see these students, some making progress, some not. But for the most part, the students, moving ahead. So you can see that. Right? And this is the level of work that we end up doing. And it's the level of work that really is necessary. So I want to give you, let's see, we've got a few minutes here. Let me get through the last few of our slides if we can, and then we can have some time. I think I showed you this. Let's go through. So you saw that one. Now you can create these data sheets yourself. It allows us to bring in, like, we import their MCAS scores, we import their Lexile scores from iReady. We can import all of that stuff and put it into one data sheet, and it allows us to manage it. Or you can use the online ones. They do a lot of the same stuff. Maybe I'm just cheap. I don't know. This is what I was talking. You saw this earlier, actually. So what happens when we make these changes? What does this look like, right? This is what it looks like. This is first grade this year. Excuse me, kindergarten this year. This is where the kids started. They walked in the door with very, very low skills in kindergarten. And then we provided the instruction we talked about in a tiered approach, and look at them jump in the winter and continue to climb in the spring. And the good part is we have kindergartners who are essentially reading, not necessarily our goal, but 78% of those kids are leaving knowing how to decode and read words. This is first grade. Look at that. Nearly 90% of our students reading words. Now, this has us a little concerned. We know that's our next step, is how we transition. So now we're looking at this data at a bigger scale, right? Now this is not that student level data. Now this is school or district wide. So now we begin to have broader conversations about how do we transition this into more impact over here. Right? We got to 80% of our K-3 students on the composite reach meeting or exceeding the benchmark. Prior to the pandemic, again, pre-pandemic, it was only 68%. So we are, with this approach in this district, far and above the pre-pandemic levels, despite everything that everyone's heard about the impact the pandemic has had. This level of attention and work is making an impact on our students. More to come. So we adopted Wit and Wisdom this year, right? It's a knowledge-based curriculum that allows us to continue to use foundations, Heggerty, the geodes, with some adjustments in our Tier 2 system. We finished our Year 2 of the Mass Literacy Grant. We added this literacy coach, which was great for us. We added 4 interventionists as well. So we used some of our ESSER funds. We have interventionists for the next 3 years to try and help close it. So when I said flood a grade level, I said we're sending 7 people in there, 3 teachers, and we're going to send those people into it, right? The ongoing book studies, so the Knowledge Gap, Kilpatrick's Essentials, and Equipped, different ones that we've done. And one of the projects that all the teachers are doing this summer, and they're getting professional development points for it, is they're reshaping their leveled classroom libraries. So everything used to be, the leveled C books, the leveled D books, whole project to take them all off the shelves and resort them all based on interest and concepts. And not only to Wit and Wisdom concepts, try to attach them to your grade level, but then also our science and social studies. So when you're reading about particular things that you can direct kids, those are the books that they end up utilizing. So that's one of our projects this year, this summer, that they're doing. We're also doing some writing PD. So this is not unique to Pentucket. So this was some of the work that I did in Melrose as an elementary principal. So in 2007, we were a 50% high needs school population. Our our students with disabilities were scoring at a 23% proficiency rate when I came aboard. And this is not just my work, this was the whole school did this. The teachers were really committed to this work. And it dipped down, we had only 60%, and then it started to click together. And you can see the gaps closing and closing and closing to the point where it just fell short of that 80% mark. And that's on the MCAS. This is the state achievement test. So that is what earned the school the National Blue Ribbon Model. And this is what is called catch-up growth. So annual growth for all and catch-up growth for those who are behind. So it's not something that just works in Pentucket. It works in Melrose, and it has worked in other communities as well. It is not a system I designed. There is not a unique thought that you heard here today whatsoever. It is largely things that I have learned and picked up from a variety of different people. A lot of, outside of the science of reading, what you're talking about is RTI and MTSS. George Batch, Dr. Batch, BATCHSE, I think. He is phenomenal about the concept of annual growth for all and catch-up growth for those who are behind. He has some great analogies and really, really powerful in thinking about if your overall proficiency rate is below 80%, that's a tier 1 problem. And it should be addressed as a tier 1 problem because you can't intervene your way out of that. No intervention and no, or if you are, it is not efficient and it's not effective. So these are the practices we need to start, and these are the practices that we need to stop. And that's really what it boils down to. In here, I give you a lot of different resources. I had referenced earlier, so if you haven't heard Emily Hanford's stuff, it's good, conceptually, it doesn't necessarily tell you what to do, but it's good conceptually to get people to understand maybe we're not doing things the right way, right? Carol Tolman's Hourglass videos, the sequence of these are phenomenal. She is one of the developers of Letters along with Louisa Motes, and these videos are really short. They're like, 4, 5, 6 minutes, and she connects the assessments, dibbles essentially, to instruction, and it's really fascinating. Linda Farrell on teaching blending. We had found, those first grade results you saw with the kids in the decoding way up into the 80s. We were stuck. The kids were struggling with blending, so they were getting the letter sounds, but it wasn't transitioning to words read correctly. We sort of altered the way they were teaching blending and took off. And now we're okay. So now it's got to transition to fluency, and now it's the next phase. So you can see this. I mean, this takes a tremendous amount of time. Right? Great resource here from Ed Week about what the science actually says. And I will share this book with you too. This is a new book. It is Follow the Science to School. It literally came out maybe about 2 months ago. One of my good friends, Barbara Davidson, she is from the Curriculum Matters group. Barbara is one of the co-authors. This book, I bought a copy, even though it's for elementary schools, I bought a copy for every administrator here. It's like a handbook. So when I talked about, do this, not that, and why, that's what this does. And it's not just about literacy, it's about everything. And it gives you recommendations, and then it gives you the rationale for the recommendations. And it is brief, to the point, and it's so well organized and laid out, and it's thin, like this is you, and you'll go back and use it very, very frequently. So if you're a school level leader, this is kind of a must have. Barbara does not give me 10% on these. I'm going to tell her though, I get it.
What's the name of that again?
It is Follow the Science to School, and it is a John Catt publication. And the authors are Barbara Davidson, Michael Petrelli, and Kathleen Carroll, all out of Fordham. I think it's the Fordham University group that did this work. So, and they had started this just prior to the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and there's things in here about how to follow it out of the pandemic as well. So they even grabbed that latest research, and just some great stuff. The annotated bibliography is this, the annotated bibliography is massive. So for everything that you feel like I just need a little more, that's your source. It just tells you, and it's really good stuff. Some of the other resources, the 3 Hewing Flawed method, so 5 from 5. This is out of Australia, but great stuff to show there. Using decodable text. So we talked about that was a big shift to ensure that you use them correctly. Don't just, oh, we're going to replace our guided reading text with decodable text. No, 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 no. They're different books for different purposes. Understand the difference. And guidance to support general ed shifts in practice. I think this is really important, right? So there are two things here from Achieve the Core. One is called Shifting from a Reader's Workshop Balanced Literacy. And then Achieve the Core, placing the text at the center. And that's one that I showed you too. And Anita Archer, who is like, we all bow down to Anita. I call her, she is the Jedi Knight of all things structured literacy. A great YouTube video from her patent symposium a couple years ago, even though I think she just did it last week, or this week, if I'm correct. And the last thing I want to show you, this is our PRSD K-6 literacy plan. At the end of the day, if you're going to make systematic shifts and you're going to move people in a way, having a literacy plan and having a group of folks that contribute to develop it is maybe the best thing you can do, because you can anchor everything you do back to the literacy plan. So I want to show that now. Are you able to see this, or am I have to change my screen again? You're able to see it. Okay. So this is our literacy plan. It's 5 years. This took us about 18. Well, we started this right before the pandemic, and we all have different priorities. So that sort of got paused for a bit, but the work didn't pause. So we ended up finishing it by sort of capturing some of the things that are already in place, right? And having this, we presented it to the school committee. The school committee approved it. It is, if it's not on our website, it will be shortly. I believe it is, though. But it's also the school committee is adopting some of these goals as their own, and that's really important. So we have some sort of big visuals that help people understand the bigger picture, but it talks about what we have committed to doing, and anchoring it back. So someone had asked earlier, well, how do you get a teacher? How do you get a principal? How do you get it's in the plan. So we just come back to the plan. Look, we have committed to building the knowledge of our students through a volume of conceptually related and coherently related text about the world around them. That's our commitment in high quality curriculum. So if you're pulling out the level text that have then you're doing something that isn't consistent with the plan. And if so, then you better have a really good reason why. So the front pages here just outline the 4 big things that we're looking for. And then it gets into the plan. We honor the individuals who contributed. We sort of had 2 different groups over all this. And we make the case, right? It goes to data. Just what I started with. 51% of our students in grades 3 to 8 were scoring at the meeting or exceeding grade level expectation on the 2019 MCAS ELA test. I could probably just write that one sentence in making the case, and I would say, we need no more information. We've made the case, but there is more information. In particular, only 16% of our students with disabilities were meeting or exceeding. We've far surpassed. And in doing so, some of this is narrative, it's a little dense, right? And we create a vision. And of course, what's one of our goals? 80% meeting expectations annually. Well, guess what we did in this year? We hit it, 80%.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. This goes on quite a bit. So we talk about the current status, we capture the history so that everyone knows like where the trainings were. And we had done a lot of different trainings over the years, even prior to me being here. You can see it links to that tiered assessment that tool that we have. We talk about core literacy, and it goes back. It has some history. You capture it. For all those people, well, I remember in 1994. Good. Let's write it in 1994. Let's put it here, right? And it goes on to capture a lot of what we have done previously. And then we go to some of the things, so resources and staffing. And then it identifies what our 3 goals are: goal 1, goal 2, and goal 3. And then it maps out how are we going to do it. So here's goal 1, and it gives us action steps, timelines, person responsible. Somehow or other, my name appears in every single one of these persons responsible, specifics, resource needed, measures of success. And these are sort of our early indicators that we're on track to meet this goal. This is a 5-year literacy plan, because this is a long road. And we really try to honor and capture a lot of what we do here. So you can see it goes through all of these goals. This is not meant to sit on the shelf. We revisit this from a leadership perspective. And then we added the expectations. This is expectations of staff, leadership, and the district, so that we're all holding up our end of the bargain. And this document will outlive the people who come and go, for instance, because that's what happens. And then we have an implementation and sustainability plan to ensure that it does just do that. It's 24 pages, but it is, it's a lot of work from a lot of different people, but I think it captures where we're going, and the decisions we make get anchored back in that tool. So I think that probably sort of wraps up the slides and all that information, and I am more than happy to enter into any dialogue that people have as we approach the last few minutes here.
Okay, we have a question. What attention is given to cultural and linguistically relevant and responsive texts, resources, instruction, practices, etc.?
Yep. So that is it. We don't consider that a silo, right? I mean, that is embedded within everything that we do. We vetted Wit and Wisdom for that purpose. I know some people critique it for that. We find it to be pretty good at providing culturally relevant texts, for instance, that open students to a variety of perspectives. And a lot of our work prior to all of that was around building sort of the capacity for folks to understand. So we don't think of it as a silo, but it's just something that's layered into everything that we're doing that we're mindful of.
Do we have any other questions, comments? Okay, this is from Mary Jo. Brent, can you give us an idea on how you facilitated the work with the team to create this plan? How often did you meet? Was the work delegated out to the team? And what certain steps were followed?
So like anything, right? As much as he's an expert, he knows how to do this. Sure. Our own people in our own district often need to hear it from someone other than me sometimes, right? Which is often the case. And we usually trade off with a few people in and around here. Like, I tell you what, I'll go tell your staff that, and you come tell my staff this, right? And then they'll believe it, But we used Keys to Literacy. Joan Sedita, who's a friend of the group for sure. Joan is wonderful, and I had called Joan and she said, Brent, you know how to do this. And I go, well, I know, Joan, but they need to hear it from someone other than me. So she came and she facilitated the first couple set, and then it is delegated off. We had those groups and subcommittees, and people were assigned different parts to collect information. And then the pandemic hit, and we did meet virtually a couple times, but people were a little overwhelmed. So we sort of put it on pause. And then Jen Hogan came on board, and we sort of reconvened and started to add and sort of finished off the product and sent it back out to the group for comments and vetting and so forth. But also it's funny, we had that pause, and by the time we got back to it, everyone looked at it and go, oh yeah, we're doing all this. Like, yep, we're already doing it all, right? So it was already sort of those shifts were in motion. So we didn't wait. Ideally, you could do a literacy plan in about probably 3 to 6 months. You could probably create one. We didn't really have parents involved. That certainly is a step, or community members you could certainly do. We did not. I think our intention was, once we sort of had something done, we were going to go to the committee, go to parents and so forth, and get their feedback. And it just, circumstances being what it is, we didn't do. So do I have a district literacy? So we are about a 2,500 student district, so we're not very large. I'm the assistant superintendent in charge of instruction, curriculum, grants, human resources, legal, you name it, right? And we did not have any coaches. We did not have any literacy people, but we have hired, Jen Hogan is our literacy, K-6 literacy and humanities coordinator and coach. So she is the sole person. We have literacy reading specialists in each building who are like the interventionists. But that's it. It's Jen and I from an administrative perspective, and then working with principals, assistant principals, and the reading specialists. So.
I have a question. Would you recommend to school districts like you did? You hired out and you had Joan come in to do like an outside evaluation. Some districts have a pride thing going. They don't want to bring an outside consultant in because we can do it ourselves. We got this, even though they just keep doing the same thing year after year, right? What are the advantages of hiring someone with fresh eyes to come in?
Yeah. Joan didn't even audit, right? Like it was just, so what we did is for the whole group who agreed to be on the committee, Joan provided 2 days of professional development. So they heard like what is, agnostic to what we're doing, right, in our district, what is supposed to be done, right? To some respect, almost what I gave you at the beginning, like the first 90 minutes I gave you over 2 days, right? So that whole group, some knew it, some didn't, right? That whole group had that knowledge at that point to then use that lens. So train the group that's going to do the work. And that's your leadership group, right? But how you make up that leadership group, you can bring some naysayers on, absolutely. Don't bring them all on, but bring some of them on for sure, right? I mean, this is that change management sort of stuff. Bring those people on board, have an administrator present. You got to have all the little pockets present. The advantage of having fresh eyes is sometimes the things that, the elephant in the room that no one wants to say, the person from the outside can say it and can look, oh, did I upset someone? And just be oblivious to it, and have no idea. And that's okay because it was said. Because at the end of the day, a first grader has 1 year in first grade. They do not have the 3 years it takes for a teacher or a principal to change their mind about the way they're supposed to teach it. So we need to create some sense of urgency sometimes. The data usually does that. In high performing schools, sometimes it's a little bit harder. But high performing schools tend to maybe push aside students with disabilities. So, well, that's the group that we don't worry about. Like they'll get what they need, right? And someone who can create the sense of urgency around that sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And that's
There's advantages, but honestly, if you have someone who can do the work, who can lead it, then let them lead it.
Yeah, and I think there
are templates. I mean,
exactly, and I think some districts might need some hand-holding, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Because if you could do it, you would have done it, right? So get the help you need and move on and be successful. All right, Eileen has a question.
Right. And people ask, do they have access? I would say, do they have access to the plan? Yes, it's linked into the slide deck. I think you can even find it on our website too. But once you get the slide deck out to Donna, are you able to email the group who's here?
If you send it to me, it will be in their mailbox in 10 minutes.
Got it. I'll send it to you. Yep.
All right, Eileen.
Donna, I just wanted to comment on the idea of outside consultants. Certainly what we see in our district is that they brought in a national consultant from Vanderbilt around highly capable. They brought in national consultants around ELL and dual language. They there was oh my gosh, diversity and equity, race and educational justice. Yep, absolutely, outside thing. But they are unable, and it's an issue of will. It isn't that they're unable, it's an issue of will to bring in a consultant around literacy, and to some extent math as well, because I think the presumption is that they know this, right? And on some level, it's that pride thing that we know this, and if we have to bring in an outside consultant around that, what does that say about us, right? That the foundational core of their function and being, well, I think that those of us on this call are probably, we're already over it. We're over that. We realize we didn't know, and we realize we need to do more, right?
Yeah.
But what is remarkable is, a friend of mine, very wise social worker who became, interestingly, went into school district MTSS as a MSW, really cool. But his comment is it an issue of will or is it an issue of skill? And the fact that there just is willfulness about this, and I have to say personally, that is what is sticking in my craw more than I get the fact that it's a super bummer that we didn't have this training. It's all of those things. But if you willfully continue, again, to take the 3 to 5 years, go slow to go fast, when that first grader just had that 180 days, they're done.
Mhm.
They're moving on. And
Right,
what did you do?
right.
Yeah.
And like you say, Brent, they only get 1 year. You only get 1 year in each grade, right?
That's it.
And if we waste it. Okay, any other questions, comments? It is 3 o'clock.
There was one question about being a district of 23,000 and 21 K5 buildings. How do you see scaling this up?
Yeah, I mean, it depends upon the makeup of the district. Of buildings have the authority to make those decisions on their own. Are they reliant upon other districts for shared personnel? And that's a leadership capacity issue at that point. Can district leadership drive that with the leadership structure that they have, or does it need to be something that's done building by building? So that's an infrastructure issue and a leadership issue. But yes, it is exhausting to wait, but it does create a sense of urgency. I can tell you, just as a very brief aside, and you'll appreciate this. So we had in Melrose, we had a library, and we had a neighborhood that was all the apartment buildings, and it was sort of our lower income area right there out the window. And we had about like the second year or so, and of course it was the building was always the lowest performing school in the district. Always, it was Lincoln. They called it Stinkin' Lincoln. That was the nickname of the school. And it was literally on the other side of the tracks. So I can't even say it as a phrase. It was literally on the other side of the tracks. And we were in a staff meeting, and one of the staff members who was a veteran, who was really a wonderful, wonderful person and a good teacher, was frustrated with sort of like, we got to push. And she said, don't they, and of course they is like the proverbial everyone else, don't they know who we have here? And I took a moment to gather myself before lurching over the table, and I went over to the window, pulled open the window shade. I said, look out there. That's not changing. You need to. And maybe I tell the story more dramatic than it was, but it certainly seemed that there was a bit of a sea change at that moment in people's attitudes towards change. So
Good for you.
and that's where we are. Yeah.
Well, on that
It's
note,
even better with a good Boston accent.
I know.
Stinkin' Lincoln. My dad's from Medford.
Oh, right next door. Right next door. Yeah. Meffa.
Brent, I want to thank you for your expertise in being here today. You're inspirational. I know I've been inspired, and I'm hoping that everyone on this call and those who have paid for this webinar will get the knowledge that they need. It's very much appreciated. We'll be calling you again.
All right. Very good. Nice
Thank
to
you
see you
so
all.
much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.